Hi everyone. Before we get into this audiobook, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and drop a like. It helps me out a lot as well as contributes a lot to the channel. Now, let's get into the story. I hope you enjoy. Aveline stood at the edge of the forest clearing, staring out at the moonlit expanse of towering evergreens that seemed to hold their breath under the gentle silver glow. The wind brushed against her skin, coaxing her wolf senses to perk up, and the crisp scent of pine mingled with the heavier musk of the pack. Normally she found the hush of night calming, but tonight her heart thundered. She had discovered Thorn was her mate earlier that day, and every nerve in her body thrummed with the realization that her entire life had shifted in the span of a few hours. Yet instead of elation, an unsettled dread stirred in her chest. She was not prepared to be bound to anyone, least of all the Alpha, who governed these lands with powerful authority. For months she had planned to leave the pack territory and chart her own path beyond the kingdom's borders. She wanted to travel, see the oceans she had only read about in books, taste the wind from mountaintops rumored to pierce the clouds, and experience everything that lay beyond the familiar forest. There was so much more to life than constant vigilance over pack politics and the unending cycle of dominance displays that often overshadowed genuine connection. Aveline had always believed there must be a place out there where she could simply be herself, free to pursue her passions without the constraints of old traditions or the never-ending expectation to fall in line with the will of Inba. Alpha. When she and Thorn had locked eyes during the morning gathering, time had seemed to stop. A hush fell over those closest to them, the pack members who recognized that sharp jolt of cosmic awareness. Every werewolf understood what it meant when two souls acknowledged one another as mates. Almost instantly, Aveline had felt both a deep sense of belonging and an unrelenting wave of claustrophobia. The mate bond was not something she had asked for, and the idea that her future might be decided in an instant clashed with her carefully laid plans. Thorn, standing at the gathering's center, had looked equally taken aback. She had always known he was the type of alpha who carried his responsibilities with stoic seriousness, never wavering in his vow to protect the pack. Yet, behind that unwavering sense of duty, she had also sensed something dark in him, a temper that occasionally flared, a possessiveness that could run deeper than the usual claim wolves felt for their territory. Now, her stomach churned as she recalled the absolute certainty in Thorn's gaze when he understood they were fated. Standing in the clearing, isolated from the rest of the sleeping pack, she let the hush of the forest envelop her. She wanted clarity before she confronted him. She needed to know how to reject the bond without causing a ripple that might destroy everything she had worked for, because rejecting an alpha was no small matter. Wolves in general struggled with mate rejection, but an alpha's reaction could be far more intense. Their instincts for dominance, for safeguarding what was theirs, often overshadowed reason. Aveline had witnessed that in other alpha pairs in the past. A rejection could lead to heartbreak, retribution, sometimes even violence. She felt the weight of those cautionary tales bearing down on her, yet she could not betray her own future. Not even for something as sacred as a mate bond. She inhaled deeply and made her decision. She would speak to Thorn, calmly but firmly. She would tell him that she had her own path to walk. She would see the world, learn different traditions, maybe even join a traveling group for a while, and figure out who she truly was without the constant presence of pack obligations shaping her identity. If she gave in to the mate bond right now, she feared she would always resent him, always blame him for clipping her wings. The question was how to make him understand, how to make him let go. She had only just discovered the cosmic link that tied them together, but she was about to sever it, and the consequences could be devastating. Gathering her resolve, she walked back along the narrow forest trail that led to the heart of the pack territory. The moonlight illuminated well-worn paths through the underbrush, and she moved silently, the rhythmic crunch of pine needles under her boots a steady meter to the fierce pounding of her heart. Torches glowed around the pack's main structures, which were scattered across a cluster of clearings and interconnected trails. Aveline's cabin, small but cozy, stood off to the side near the orchard, and she steered toward it on instinct, her mind replaying Thorn's resolute stare and the faint tremor in his voice when he realized they were bound by fate. Even at this late hour, she was not the only one still awake. A few wolves in human form lingered near a central bonfire that burned low, offering a little light and warmth to night patrollers. She quietly slipped past them, hoping to avoid conversation. She sensed their eyes flicker toward her in curiosity. Rumors about the Alpha's newly discovered mate must have spread quickly, but no one called out. She was grateful for that small mercy. She had no desire to discuss the bond until she knew exactly what she was going to do. Slipping inside her cabin, she sank onto a worn wooden stool by the hearth. Her small home had always been her sanctuary, the place she filled with books, dried herbs, and carefully guarded letters from pen pals in distant lands. She had yearned to visit those pen pals, to exchange not just words, but actual experiences, cultures, and discoveries. A grand trunk in the corner contained trinkets she had collected over the years, each one a promise that she would one day journey beyond the pack's borders. Yet now, all those dreams were threatened by a single, undeniable truth: she was fated to the Alpha. Her friend Faye had told her only last month, "The mate bond is an unbreakable blessing. It'll be the best thing that ever happens to you." But Faye was the sort of wolf who had yearned for a mate all her life, eager to build a home and family in the pack. Aveline wanted more than that. She wanted to be more than just a role attached to someone else. The mate bond could become a cage, and she feared that Thorn, with his alpha dominance, would hold her captive, no matter how gilded the bars. Unable to find any rest, she dozed on and off until early morning light filtered through the cabin windows. By dawn, her course was set. She would request a private meeting with Thorn, explain her stance, and pray that he would let her go peacefully. She summoned all her courage, dressed in a simple tunic and trousers, then made her way to the pack's main hall as the sun rose over the treetops. A few younger wolves milled around the courtyard, and a pair of older packmates stacked bundles of firewood. She tried to keep her gait steady, confident, but her heart drummed a frantic beat. When she reached the main hall, a sturdy log structure used for council gatherings and important ceremonies, she found Thorn seated at the long table, speaking quietly with his beta, a formidable woman named Cabaret. Evangeline. Evangeline was one of the few wolves who could match Thorn's ferocity in battle, and she also served as his most trusted advisor. Seeing them in hushed conversation made Aveline hesitate in the doorway. There was a tightness in Thorn's jaw, and his usual calm seemed strained. She wondered if he had slept at all. Sensing her presence, he lifted his gaze, and his eyes, gray flecked with gold, met hers with fierce intensity. Aveline bit her lip. The bond stirred within her, urging her to close the distance between them, to place her hand on his and draw in the familiar scent that had ignited something inside her from the moment they recognized each other as mates. She resisted. Evangeline followed Thorn's gaze, saw Aveline, and stood. "I'll give you a moment," she said simply, inclining her head in a brief bow to Aveline before leaving. Her gaze was curious, but she did not pry. She had known Thorn long enough to realize that this discussion was best handled in private. Aveline forced her feet forward and stepped into the hall, the door creaking shut behind her. The space was large, lined with intricately carved pillars that told the story of the pack's lineage. Pictures of battles, hunts, and alliances formed with neighboring territories. Her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, each one a reminder of the significance of this confrontation. Thorn stood as she approached, tall and lean, his posture radiating the authority of his position. She could see the tension in the set of his shoulders and the subtle trembling in the muscles of his arms, as though some powerful energy coursed just beneath his skin. His scent reached her, calling out to the wolf inside her, but she steeled herself. She would not be swayed by instinct or primal longing. Her eyes flicked to the collar of his shirt, where a faint scratch from training had yet to fully heal. Alpha or not, he was still flesh and blood, and she was about to wound him in a way no physical injury could compare. They regarded each other for a moment, neither speaking. Finally, Thorn gestured to one of the wooden chairs beside the table. "Sit," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Aveline sank into the offered seat, clasping her hands together in her lap. He took the chair opposite hers, leaning forward slightly. She noted the faint dark circles under his eyes, evidence that sleep had eluded him. "I didn't see you after yesterday's gathering," he began, keeping his voice measured. I wanted to find you, but I figured we both needed time to process." He swallowed, as though pushing down his own anxiety, and continued, "I suppose we should talk about us." His words, so carefully chosen, momentarily shook Aveline's resolve. She could feel the bond tugging, like a cord connecting them. How easy it would be to surrender to the fated connection, to let it solve the question of her future in one decisive breath. But that was not what she wanted, and she had decided long ago she would not let her life be directed by anything other than her own will. She lifted her eyes to meet his. "Yes, we need to talk about the mate bond, and we need to talk about my future." He inhaled, steeling himself for whatever words she would say. "Whatever it is," he replied. "I want to hear it, but I have to tell you I've never felt anything like this in my life, and I don't want to let it go. You know how it is with our kind. The mate bond is sacred, and I can't imagine not claiming what was destined for me. I have to protect you, to care for you." She could hear the conviction in his tone, and it both moved her and terrified her. She remembered overhearing once that an alpha's mate was treasured above all else, cherished as the heart of the pack. But she also knew it could be suffocating to be kept under such a constant watch. "I understand how important the bond is," she said softly, "but it doesn't change what I want from life. Ever since I was little, I've had this dream of leaving the pack territory, traveling far beyond these borders, living on my own terms. I don't want to be confined by the routines or the obligations of pack life. Not now, maybe not ever. It's not that I hate the pack. I love the sense of community, the traditions, the closeness. It's just that I need to see what else is out there, or I'll never forgive myself if I don't at least try." His brow furrowed, and he leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "You think you can't do that here? That you can't pursue the life you want with me by your side?" His voice carried a tremor of hurt, and the bond reverberated with it, intensifying the moment. She wished she could deny it, to assure him that everything could be perfect if they tried. But she knew that was not the truth, and she wouldn't lead him on with false promises. "Thorn, our entire pack expects me to step into the role of Luna if I accept the bond. I'd be tied to pack politics, traditions, duties. There's always a price to pay for being the alpha's mate. And even if you were open to me traveling, you have your responsibilities here. You can't uproot everything. You're the alpha. The pack needs you. And I don't want to drag you away from that, nor do I want to be stuck here while you carry out your duties. His jaw tightened. That doesn't have to stop you. If you have a dream to travel, I can find a way. We could talk to the elders, arrange for my beta to oversee things while we're gone. This bond is bigger than any tradition. If you walk away from this, you're rejecting something that's sacred to our kind. Her heartbeat pounded. She had not expected him to be so flexible, to be willing to compromise. Yet, even as he spoke, she saw conflict flickering in his eyes. Aveline knew how integral the alpha was to pack stability. To abandon his domain, even temporarily, would create a power vacuum that might invite chaos or rival challenges. She tried to imagine it, but it felt like a half measure, a fleeting arrangement that would eventually disintegrate under the weight of reality. She shook her head. You and I both know that leaving for an extended time is not feasible. Your presence is essential here. And that's why. Her voice caught, and she swallowed hard. That's why I want to reject the mate bond. I can't sacrifice my future, and I can't ask you to sacrifice your duty. It's better we end this now, before it takes root and binds us more deeply. I'm sorry. For a long moment, Thorn said nothing. The silence pressed heavily between them, so intense that Aveline wondered if she could draw her next breath. She saw the flicker of raw pain in his eyes, followed by confusion, then anger. He clenched his fists. You can't be serious, he growled. The bond is supposed to be a gift, not a burden. Do you have any idea what rejection does to a wolf, especially an alpha? She knew, at least in theory. She had heard stories of the agony, both physical and emotional, that came with severing a mate bond. Some wolves never fully recovered. The stronger the wolf, the more violent the repercussions could be. I'm not doing this to hurt you, she whispered, her voice trembling at the devastation on his face. I just can't compromise who I am. He let out a harsh laugh, the sound full of bitterness. And you think you know who you are better than fate itself? That you can simply walk away from what the moon has decided? She flinched at his words, but steadied her resolve. This is about my freedom. If I embrace a bond I never wanted, I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, resenting you, resenting the pack. That's not what a mate is supposed to feel. His breath came in ragged bursts, and she could see his struggle to remain calm. There were so many things he might say. Threats, pleas, or even attempts at persuasion. But instead, he rose abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. So that's it? You're tossing away our bond just like that? He spat. You claim you want freedom, but all I see is someone running scared from her own destiny. She stood too, eyes stinging with unshed tears. I'm not running scared. I'm making a choice for myself, for once. And yes, I am rejecting the bond. Officially, irrevocably, I am sorry. Her voice cracked. She had rehearsed the lines in her head all night, but they still tore her apart when she said them out loud. Dorn's entire frame shook, as though his wolf side fought to explode from his human skin. His lips curled in a snarl, but the expression was not purely hostile. There was heartbreak there too. He clenched his teeth. Leave, he managed, his tone low and dangerous. If you want to walk away from your mate, if you want to break an alpha's bond, then leave. But mark my words, Aveline, there is a price for this. You do not realize what you have unleashed. She could barely see through tears, but she refused to succumb to them in front of him. She turned on her heel, ignoring the pain ripping through her, ignoring the voice of her wolf howling in her mind, and left the main hall. Outside, the fresh morning air felt heavy, as though the entire forest sensed the rupture in their world. As she reached her cabin, she fought to keep her composure. Her mind was already planning the next steps. She had to leave the pack territory for good. She had to gather her belongings, slip out before midday. If she stayed any longer, Thorn might try to force her to reconsider, or the pack might intervene. She needed to be far away before the repercussions of her rejection took hold. Her cabin was silent as she stepped inside, the small space now seeming suffocating. She threw clothes, dried foods, and a few treasured items into a worn leather bag. Every muscle in her body was taut, and her mind buzzed with the leftover echo of Thorn's fury. She thought of him in the hall, his fists clenched, his entire being trembling with the shock of her rejection. She wondered what he was doing at that very moment, whether he was pacing or raging, or if he had already taken off in wolf form to vent his pain. She forced herself to remain focused. Sadness and guilt threatened to break her resolve, but she reminded herself of her convictions. Her exit from the territory would be complicated. She had to avoid the main gates, because pack guardians posted there would surely suspect something. Her plan was to slip through a lesser-traveled path near the orchard, cross the shallow creek, and disappear into the thicker forest. From there, she could make her way to the old road that led beyond their lands. She would keep traveling until she found a merchant caravan, or a passing band of explorers, anyone who could help her blend in and move unnoticed. Midday sun warmed the clearing outside her cabin as she finally slung the bag over her shoulder and left everything she had ever known behind. Her heart raced as she crossed the orchard, stepping carefully among the rows of apple trees, mindful of any watchers. The orchard was quiet, the ripe fruit not yet ready for harvest, and she was grateful for the empty space. She pressed on until she found the faint path that meandered alongside the shallow creek, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. Each step drove home the reality of what she was doing. She was leaving, truly leaving, with no intention of returning. As she picked her way across the creek, the cold water stung her ankles, and the forest's thick shadows enveloped her on the other side. She pushed through undergrowth, feeling the scrape of branches on her arms, and pressed forward until she found an overgrown trail that led deeper into the wilderness. Relief and sorrow mingled in her chest, and she paused only once to look back. The packlands were no longer visible through the thick grove of pines. She exhaled, letting go of any lingering sense of hesitation, and continued. She would walk for as long as it took to put miles between herself and that heartbreak. Yet, even as she ventured farther, the bond's resonance pulsed painfully, a reminder that it had not disappeared just because she had uttered words of rejection. There would be consequences, both for her and for Thorn. Wolves did not sever a mate bond without suffering a spiritual wound, one that could fester and grow. Aveline tried to ignore it. She had made her choice. For hours she trudged through uneven terrain, forging her way toward the west, away from the pack, away from the life she had known. But even as the forest gave way to meadow, even as the weight of her bag tugged at her shoulders, an uneasy feeling coiled in her gut. She had expected pain, guilt, sadness, but this was something more ominous. A creeping sense that she was no longer walking alone in that quiet stretch of wilderness. She hesitated, scanning the meadow's edge, but found no immediate sign of pursuit. Still, the sensation of being watched refused to fade. Refusing to give in to fear, she pressed on, telling herself that Thorn would not stoop to sending trackers after her. If he considered her decision final, perhaps he would let her go. Yet, she could not quell the memory of his final words. There is a price for this. You do not realize what you have unleashed. When an alpha was spurned, especially one with a powerful wolf spirit, it could unleash a feral side, something that might take the form of jealousy, rage, or obsession. She knew enough about her own nature to understand that primal instincts could tear reason apart. By the time the sun began to sink behind distant hills, Aveline was exhausted. The meadowland had transformed into rolling fields dotted with sparse trees. She found a secluded place near a trickling stream and set down her bag. Nightfall would come soon, and she needed shelter. She crouched to inspect the area for signs of predator activity, bears, cougars, or even rogue wolves. Everything seemed calm, so she gathered some fallen branches and built a modest lean-to against the trunk of an old willow. She had no illusions about her vulnerability. Traveling alone in these lands was risky, especially for a female wolf who had just severed a bond with an alpha. But this had been her choice, and she would face the perils as they came. As dusk settled, she kindled a small fire from the branches and dried twigs, warming her hands over the dancing flame. Without the comforting familiarity of the pack, the forest's nocturnal noises sounded strange, and a twinge of loneliness pricked her heart. She was used to hearing the distant chatter of packmates, the occasional howl on the wind. Now, the isolation pressed in, heightening her every sense. She told herself it was exactly what she wanted: independence, a life unshackled. And yet, a stray thought crossed her mind. In the quiet hours of night, she had always imagined traveling with others, forging friendships with new companions along the way. This solitary flight, spurred by heartbreak and rejection, was not the glorious departure she had once envisioned. She took a shaky breath. She would endure. The next few days would be the hardest, but soon enough, she would reach the outskirts of other territories. She had the skills to hunt, to survive. She closed her eyes, trying to quell the memory of Thorn's pained expression. Did he feel her absence, the way she felt the ache in her chest? Like a piece of her had been torn away. She shook the thought from her mind and lay down on a bed of pine needles, cloak pulled tight around her. Tomorrow, she would continue onward, seeking some safer haven. Perhaps she would find a caravan or travelers heading west. Eventually, she would cross the range of mountains that marked the boundary of her homeland, and once she was truly beyond the pack's domain, she would be free. Sleep came fitfully. She dreamed of the day's confrontation, of Thorn's eyes flashing with pained betrayal, of the bond shimmering between them like a silver cord fraying at the edges. And in the dream, the cord snapped, unleashing a thunderous wave of darkness that crept in from all sides. She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, the faint glow of dawn illuminating the sky. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving wisps of smoke curling into the cold air. She realized her cheeks were wet with tears she did not remember shedding. Wiping them away, she forced herself to her feet. She would not give in to regret. She had a mission: to keep moving. By mid-morning, she found a winding dirt path that seemed to head west, and she followed it until she came across a small trading post nestled by an old rickety bridge. The place was little more than a few run-down huts and a stable where battered wagons were parked. A handful of travelers milled about, exchanging goods. She kept her hood drawn low, wary of drawing attention, but she needed to purchase some supplies for her journey. Thankfully, the werewolf packs in this region had little interest in such isolated outposts, so she hoped no one would recognize her as the alpha's fated mate who had just fled. Approaching the stall of a tall merchant with a tired expression, Aveline exchanged the few silver coins she had for dried meats and a fresh water skin. The man eyed her curiously, but asked no questions. She was just another traveler in his eyes, and that suited her perfectly. She scanned the area, looking for a wagon that might take her farther west, but most of the caravans were heading north or south. When she inquired, she learned that no westbound group was expected for another 3 days. She hesitated. She could wait, or she could continue on foot. The desire to put as much distance between herself and the pack was strong, yet part of her craved the security of traveling with others. Eventually, she decided to keep going alone. She didn't want to linger in one place for too long. Word of her rejection might spread, and if Thorn or his beta sent scouts after her, this would be one of the first places they would check. So she pushed on, the day stretching out in a blur of dusty roads and passing travelers who offered polite nods but did not engage in conversation. Every so often, the hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and she spun around to scan her surroundings, certain she was being followed. Each time, she found nothing but emptiness. She told herself her nerves were playing tricks on her, that she was just shaken by the enormity of what she had done. Yet the unease never fully abated. That night, she found another makeshift campsite, this time by a shallow ravine. She had managed to hunt a small rabbit for dinner, cooking it over a modest fire, the scent of roasted meat comforting despite the swirl of emotions within her. She reflected on the day's journey, the monotony of walking, the fear of being pursued, the pang of loneliness that gnawed at her now that the initial adrenaline of escape was wearing off. Still, she reassured herself that this was the right path. Freedom often came with hardship. She took a deep breath of the night air, letting the hush of the wilderness settle around her, and tried to banish the memory of Thorn from her mind. She wouldn't let regret take root. She had no other choice. But somewhere out there, the Alpha she had rejected was almost certainly grappling with the mate bond's agonizing rupture. And a part of her suspected that heartbreak could easily twist into obsession, especially in a wolf as powerful and passionate as Thorn. As she drifted off to a restless sleep, she had no idea how close her suspicions were to the truth, and that an Alpha scorned might be far more dangerous than she ever imagined. Thorn tore through the forest in wolf form, each bound a collision of paws against damp earth as he tried to run from the searing pain in his chest. The bond, even partially severed by Aveline's rejection, still pulsed with raw energy, and he could feel the stabs of that final break echo through his entire being. Part of him raged at her decision, furious that she had so casually tossed aside a connection most wolves would cherish above all else. Another part of him pleaded for calm, telling him that he was the Alpha, that he needed to remain composed for the sake of his pack. But composure felt impossible. Rejection for an ordinary wolf was devastating enough, but for an Alpha, the shock could unhinge the soul. Possessive instincts warred with heartbreak, leaving him in a volatile state. He wanted to hunt her down, to drag her back, to force her to see that the bond they shared was worth any sacrifice. Yet a shred of rationality reminded him that doing so would only confirm the very fear that had driven her away in the first place, the fear of being caged, stripped of freedom. His beta, Aveline, had attempted to reason with him soon after Aveline left. He had bellowed his torment at her, smashing a wooden bench in the process, and she had quietly weathered his outburst before offering to mobilize scouts. He had roared an objection, uncertain whether he should chase Aveline or respect her choice. The confusion was paralyzing, and Aveline had gently advised him to take a moment to breathe, to sort out his instincts before making a decision he would regret. That had only fueled his frustration. How could she, or anyone else, comprehend the agony coursing through him? In wolf form he dashed through the dense undergrowth, breath rasping in his throat. The forest around him seemed alien now, its familiar paths losing their comforting quality. Everything smelled dull, tinged by the acrid edge of heartbreak. The bond snapped at him like a whip, reminding him that Aveline's presence was gone from these woods. One moment, rage flared in him, urging him to find her, to pull her back by any means. The next, sorrow crushed him, leaving him half-blind with grief. He was an alpha undone by the single person meant to complete him. He thundered over a fallen log and skidded to a halt near a creek, panting, his tongue lolling from exertion. He raised his muzzle to the sky and let out a howl that reverberated with the rawness of his despair. The sound echoed across the trees, a lament that spoke of betrayal, longing, and the primal urge to reclaim what was rightfully his. When the howl faded, he was met with only silence. Aveline was too far away to hear, and even if she heard, would she respond? Hours later, when the full toll of his exhaustion finally forced him to shift back, Thorn collapsed against a boulder, breathing heavily. His clothes, hastily ripped off or lost in his transformation, lay scattered behind him. He covered himself as best he could with the remains of his shirt, staring at the ground, his mind swirling with an internal war. The rational side, the alpha side that had governed the pack for years, insisted that an official rejection should be respected. Wolves had the right to make their own choices. But another side, primal and wounded, snarled at the thought of letting her go. He was not just any wolf. He was an alpha, and that meant a far deeper bond. The pain of losing a mate could drive an alpha to madness. Eventually, he forced himself to stand and limp back toward the heart of the territory. The night was deep by the time he reached the main hall. Most of the pack members were asleep, and only a few night sentries were posted around the perimeter. He heard them whisper as he passed, but no one dared approach him in his current state. Inside, he found Aveline waiting, arms folded, her face lined with concern. She said nothing until he sank onto a bench in the shadowy corridor. Finally, she spoke quietly. "Thorn, your eyes are bloodshot. You need rest." He snorted, the sound half laugh, half sob. "Rest? How am I supposed to rest when half my soul has been torn away?" Aveline crouched beside him, her voice cautious but firm. "I know how important a mate bond is. I know the power of it, but we can't have our alpha unraveling. The pack senses your turmoil. They need reassurance, stability. You have to make a decision. Do you honor her choice, or do you attempt to bring her back?" He clenched his fists. "I can't just let her do this, Aveline. She's rejecting a bond that the moon itself sanctioned. She's throwing away the chance for us to be something incredible together." He felt tears threaten to fall, and fought to maintain composure, though every breath felt like it was laced with shards of glass. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You're an alpha, and with that comes responsibility, but also certain rights. If you truly believe this rejection was a mistake, you can track her down and try to convince her otherwise. However, forcibly dragging her back will only confirm her fears. You need to decide what kind of mate, what kind of alpha you want to be." He closed his eyes. He remembered the hurt on Aveline's face, the resoluteness in her voice when she said she would not be bound. It was not a whim, he knew. She had dreamt of freedom for a long time, yearned to see the world. He had ignored those signs because he was too caught up in the bond's radiance. Now, her words echoed. "I can't sacrifice my future. I'm sorry." He wanted to respect her wishes, but the bond refused to let him merely watch her walk away. The more he tried to calm himself, the more he felt the simmer of obsession. Her departure was a wound, and it throbbed in every cell of his body. "If she's set on leaving, I can't stop her," he said quietly, though the words felt like swallowing shards of ice. "But I can't just let her vanish. I have to see her, talk to her one more time something. I need closure." Aveline nodded. "Then let's do this carefully. Choose a few scouts you trust. See if they can locate her. Promise me you won't harm her or force her hand. The entire pack is on edge. And if the rumors spread that you're hunting your mate against her will, it could fracture us. We can't afford that sort of internal strife." He met her eyes and let out a long breath. "I promise I won't hurt her," he managed. He knew it was the truth. He could never hurt Aveline, no matter how angry or desperate he felt. But the images in his mind were muddled, pleading with her, demanding explanations, maybe even ignoring her protests and whisking her back. He reined in those darker impulses and reminded himself that he wanted her by his side willingly, not as a prisoner. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Thorn kept himself busy with the routine tasks of leading the pack, settling disputes, overseeing hunts, dealing with supplies. But everywhere he turned, he saw reminders of her absence. The orchard where she used to gather baskets of apples, the library corner where she devoured books about distant lands. He had always admired her curiosity, her hunger for new experiences, but he had never guessed it would drive her away from him. In quiet moments, the bond's severed edges howled in his spirit. It was a wound that refused to scab over, pulsing raw and red. He found no solace in his duties, nor in the polite sympathy from the elders. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, remembered the softness in her voice when she told him she couldn't stay. It ignited a cycle of rage and sorrow, fueling the obsession that she must return, one way or another. The scouts, discreet and careful, reported back each evening. They had traced her path to a small trading post west of pack territory, where she stocked up on supplies. From there, she seemed to be heading deeper into the wilds, alone. That knowledge tormented Thorn. She was vulnerable out there, unprotected. The thought of her facing rogues or dangerous creatures made his wolf snarl. And yet, she had chosen that risk over sharing a life with him. The sting of betrayal tasted bitter on his tongue. By the fourth day, the scouts lost her trail in the maze of winding roads beyond the fields. Some suggested she might have joined a caravan, others believed she was traveling off the main paths. Thorn grew restless, pacing the corridors of the main hall with an energy verging on mania. At night, he would transform again, running, until exhaustion forced him to stop. But the raw ache never left. He found himself consumed by memories of Aveline's laughter, the gentle kindness in her eyes, the way she used to hum under her breath when she thought no one was listening. The more he remembered, the more determined he became to find her. Finally, he made a decision. Gathering Aveline, he told her he would leave the pack under her watch for a short time. The beta, though hesitant, agreed. She knew that if he stayed any longer, he might tear the pack apart with his unstable mood. At least if he sought Aveline himself, he might regain some measure of composure, or so Aveline hoped. But remember, she warned, do not force her back. Let her choose. He said nothing to that, only nodded and clenched his jaw. Deep down, he was not sure he could be so gentle if he came face to face with Aveline. His wolf snarled for possession, for the mate that was his by fate's decree. But he promised Aveline he would keep that impulse in check, if only to keep the pack from splintering. At dawn, he set off on foot, following the faint trail his scouts had discovered. The morning sun cast long shadows across the undergrowth, and he traveled swiftly, ignoring all else. A sense of grim purpose guided his steps. He had to see her again, if only to make sure she was safe, if only to give her one last chance to change her mind. The rational side of him told him not to pin hope on that possibility, but the wounded maid in him refused to let go completely. For days he traced rumors of a lone female wolf traveling west. He encountered merchants who remembered a woman with captivating green eyes, politely asking for directions. He followed the faintest whiff of her scent in the air when the wind was just right. The bond's residue hung between them, and though it was not enough to pinpoint her exact location, it tugged at his soul, driving him onward even when fatigue threatened to fell him. Meanwhile, Aveline pressed deeper into unfamiliar lands. She found no immediate group to travel with, so she kept forging ahead alone, determined to place as many miles between herself and the pack as she could. Days of walking wore her down, leaving her body sore and her spirit weary. But she reminded herself of her goal: freedom, self-discovery, a life unchained by duty and expectation. The dream she had harbored for years. Yet it was difficult to revel in it when her heart felt bruised by the bond's aftershocks. One afternoon, she ventured into a small settlement perched on a hillside near a meandering river. The place was called Riverbend, a modest collection of thatched roof cottages and a central market. She arrived dusty and footsore, her cloak tattered at the edges from trekking through dense brush. The villagers eyed her with a mix of curiosity and caution, but they seemed accustomed to travelers passing through. She found a small inn that offered a single room, no questions asked, so long as she paid in coin. She was running low on funds, but the prospect of a bed, after nights of sleeping on the cold ground, was too tempting to refuse. Inside her rented room, a cramped space with a creaky bed and a shuttered window, she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her reflection in a chipped mirror startled her. She looked drawn, her cheeks hollow from exhaustion. She sighed and shut her eyes, leaning against the wall. Was this truly the freedom she had chased? Endless roads, constant worry about being followed, the weight of guilt that gnawed at her each time the bond's memory rose in her mind. She forced the doubts away. There was no turning back. She would rest here for a day or two, replenish her strength, and then continue west until she found a proper caravan or an open route that would lead to safer lands. She unbuckled her bag, rummaging for something to eat, and grimaced at how low her supplies had run. Food would be an issue soon, and she would need coin to purchase more. She contemplated taking up odd jobs in the settlement. Maybe she could do menial tasks for a week or so, earn enough to sustain her travels. If she kept her wolf identity hidden, no one would know she was an outcast from an alpha's domain. That evening, she ventured out into the main square of Riverbend, attracted by the lively chatter of townsfolk gathered near a large bonfire. It seemed to be a seasonal festival, with local farmers and crafters displaying their wares. A traveling bard strummed a lute, serenading a small crowd. The aroma of spiced meats filled the air, mingling with the floral scent of the night. She found a corner table near one of the makeshift stalls, where she traded a few coins for a bowl of stew. She ate quietly, observing the village's simple camaraderie. Children chased each other around the bonfire, and couples danced to the bard's music. A pang of sadness flickered in her chest, the sight evoking memories of the pack's harvest celebrations, when she would join friends in laughter and dancing. She tried to push the memory aside, focusing instead on the warmth of the stew. Halfway through her meal, a voice startled her. "You're new in town," said a tall woman with sun-bleached hair, her face lined with the marks of a life spent working outdoors. "Name's Saren. I see you don't have a dancing partner. Care to join the festivities?" Aveline blinked. She had been so lost in her thoughts she hadn't noticed the woman approach. Smiling politely, she shook her head. "Oh, thank you. But I'm just passing through. Long day of travel. I'm afraid I'm too tired to dance." Saren gave her a friendly shrug. "Suit yourself. If you're looking for work, I run the local stable. Could use an extra hand if you're good with horses. Pays modest, but it's honest labor. Think it over." Then she moved off, beckoned by another group of locals. Aveline watched her go, considering the opportunity. Working at the stable for a short time might indeed solve her financial worries, allowing her to rest while earning enough coin to fund her next steps. Yet as she mulled it over, she couldn't fully shake the sense of being watched. The crowd was cheerful, the dancing lively, but her wolf senses pricked. She scanned the perimeter, looking for anyone who seemed too interested in her presence. She spotted no one immediately suspicious, but the feeling lingered. She finished her stew and slipped away from the bonfire, returning to the inn's quiet hallway. Weariness settled deep in her bones, and she retreated to her room, latching the door behind her. Sleep was slow to come, haunted by the memory of Thorn's eyes. She could almost hear his voice in her ear, demanding to know why she would reject him. She dreamt of the pack territory consumed by raging flames, of wolves running in terror as Thorn's fury set the forest alight. She jolted awake, shivering, unsure if it was just a nightmare or a warning of what could come. The next morning, she rose early. A quick breakfast of bread and cheese from the inn's kitchen was enough to fuel her for the day. She decided to accept Saren's offer, at least temporarily. The stable sat on the far edge of Riverbend, near wide grazing fields for horses. Saren was there, tending to a mare's hoof, and she greeted Aveline with a friendly nod when she arrived. "You can start by cleaning out the stalls," the stable owner said, handing her a pitchfork and a wide shovel. "It's not glamorous, but it's needed. Then we'll see if you're good enough to help with grooming or feeding." Aveline thanked her and started the menial labor. The smell was overwhelming at first, but she soon fell into a rhythm, grateful for something that occupied her hands and her mind. The routine grounded her, offering a respite from her swirling thoughts. As she worked, she overheard fragments of conversation between townsfolk passing by. Most were gossiping about the festival or comparing market prices, but occasionally, a snippet drifted her way about strangers on the road, about sightings of travelers who looked like they were searching for someone. Her muscles tensed whenever she heard such talk. She feared Thorn's trackers might have come this far, though none of the descriptions matched her closely. All the same, she remained vigilant. After a few days in Riverbend, she settled into a tenuous sense of calm. She was saving her coin, earning respect from Saren, and learning to navigate the villagers' daily life. Yet she never let her guard down. Every evening, as the sun dipped, she would glance over her shoulder, scanning the outskirts for any sign of a lone wolf or a small band that might be hunting her. The fear was subtle but persistent, a constant reminder that her freedom was fragile at best. One late afternoon, she was in the stable's loft, stacking hay bales, when the sound of raised voices caught her attention. Peering over the ledge, she saw Saren talking to a pair of rugged strangers who wore the look of mercenaries, broad shoulders, dusty cloaks, swords strapped to their belts. They were asking questions. Aveline strained her hearing, carefully picking out their words. "We haven't seen a lone woman, maybe traveling under a false name?" one of the men asked, voice low. "We heard she might have come through here." Saren shrugged, eyeing them warily. "Travelers pass through often, but I'm not in the habit of collecting personal information." The other man pressed. "She's dangerous, you understand. A rogue who betrayed her pack. We're under instructions to locate her, and bring her back for justice. Aveline's stomach twisted at the lie. She gripped the edge of the loft, heart hammering. These had to be Thorne's trackers, or at least hired by someone acting on his behalf. It infuriated her that they would label her as dangerous, or a betrayer. With her senses on high alert, she prepared to slip away, but curiosity held her in place. Saren sighed. "No rogues that I know of. Folks here don't care about your pack feuds. If you want to ask around, be my guest, but don't cause trouble, or you'll be the ones facing justice." Aveline felt a pang of gratitude for Saren's blunt defense, even though the stable owner was unaware she was actually helping someone on the run. The mercenaries seemed dissatisfied. They exchanged a look, then moved off, presumably to continue questioning other villagers. Heart pounding, Aveline eased back, careful not to make any noise. It was official. She could not stay in Riverbend. If the trackers were close enough to spread lies about her, it was only a matter of time before they discovered who she was. She had hoped to remain in one place for a while, but that was no longer an option. Once again, she would have to vanish into the unknown, alone. As dusk settled that same day, Aveline gathered her meager belongings and prepared to leave the inn. She slipped a small note under Saren's door, thanking her for the opportunity and apologizing for the sudden departure. Then she used the last of her coin to purchase a few supplies for the road, staying alert to any watchers. She noticed the mercenaries lingering near the central market, questioning passers-by, but they didn't notice her hooded figure slipping by with purposeful strides. Night descended in a velvety hush as she left Riverbend, the silhouette of the village's flickering lights fading behind her. She hurried along a narrow path that followed the river for a short distance before cutting west across a gently rolling plain. Tall grass whispered around her legs, and the sky overhead was awash in a dazzling array of stars. Ordinarily, such a scene would have filled her with wonder, but tonight she moved as if pursued by shadows. The only solace came from knowing she was a skilled wolf, capable of quick transformations, faster than any human mercenary. But that assumed she had enough warning to shift before they caught her off guard. She pushed herself until her muscles burned, determined to put miles between herself and the trackers. Finally, she reached a secluded stretch of woodland and decided to set up a discreet campsite. She picked a spot behind a clump of rocks where she was shielded from the main road, and she laid out her bedroll on the bare ground. As she settled, her limbs trembling with fatigue, she thought of Thorne. Was he the one who hired those men? Or was it a well-intentioned elder from the pack who believed they were capturing a rogue? Although she had tried to prepare herself for the possibility of pursuit, she had hoped that Thorne would accept her rejection in time, that he would not seek to chain her. A swirl of anger, hurt, and longing churned in her chest. She told herself this was exactly why she left, to escape being cornered, forced to remain in a life she did not choose. Yet the ache never fully left her. She felt the severed bond like a bruise on her soul, throbbing whenever she let her thoughts wander. Sleep came in fitful fragments. Every sound in the forest jolted her awake, convinced she was being followed. By the time dawn light seeped through the branches, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Still, she pressed on, traveling across a new expanse of wilderness, forging deeper into territories she had only read about in her beloved books. She encountered scattered farms, crossed a dilapidated wooden bridge spanning a wide river, and once more found herself in a sparsely populated area, with only lonely roads and small homesteads breaking the prairie. Monotony, constant vigilance weighed on her, but she tried to embrace the faint thrill of each new horizon. Meanwhile, Thorne was getting closer. After days of unrelenting pursuit, He had tracked his mercenaries to Riverbend, arriving just hours after Aveline's flight. The townsfolk were tight-lipped, but he coaxed enough details from them to confirm she had worked at the stable. He stood outside the inn where she had rented a room, inhaling the faint trace of her scent. It was unmistakable and brought a swift pang to his chest, a wild rush of longing that threatened to overwhelm him. She had been so close, practically within arm's reach, and now she was gone again. His despair intertwined with a sharp anger. Some part of him, a deeply instinctual piece, would not accept that she was gone, not when the bond still flickered faintly through his being, reminding him that she was out there. When one of the mercenaries tried to speak with him, insisting that they would continue the search, Thorn silenced them with a glare. He didn't trust them to handle the situation delicately enough. Not now. This was a matter between him and his mate, even if she had forsaken that title. Ordering them to stand down, he decided he would find her on his own, relying on his sharpened senses to catch her trail. Each night, he scoured the roads and fields, shifting into wolf form if necessary, following the faintest trace of Aveline's presence. By day, he questioned travelers. The obsession grew with each passing hour. A dark voice whispered in the back of his mind that he had the right to claim her, to bring her back by force if needed. But the rational Alpha sideward against that voice, reminding him he wanted her of her own free will. The internal conflict left him volatile, vacillating between grim determination and reckless hunger to have her by his side. Fate seemed to toy with both of them. Aveline changed directions frequently, sometimes slipping north along a hidden path, sometimes heading west on overgrown trails. She stayed away from main roads when possible, clinging to the safety of isolation. She had almost entirely run out of coin and resorted to hunting small game when she had no alternative. The lonely days stretched, blurring into each other, and the nights were haunted by the same dream of an alpha's blazing eyes and the mate bond they had never fully consummated. But all illusions of safety vanished one evening, when, on the edge of a desolate moorland, she spotted a silhouette on the horizon. The sinking sun cast the figure in hazy light, but she caught a glimpse of a large wolf form that made her blood run cold. She immediately crouched among the tall grass, heart pounding in her ears. Through narrowed eyes, she watched the figure move, each step confident, purposeful. She recognized the posture, the aura of power. It was Thorn. Somehow, he was there, on the same lonely stretch of land as her, his head turning as though sniffing the air for her scent. Panic erupted inside her. She had anticipated trackers, but to see Thorn himself, on foot, left her trembling with conflicting emotions. She felt an unbidden surge of relief at the sight of him alive, but also overwhelming fear that he would drag her back. Their bond, even in its damaged state, hummed, making her own wolf stir with longing. She knew she had seconds to act before he might spot her or catch her scent on the shifting wind. She had to slip away, use every ounce of cunning she had learned from years of traveling the wilderness. She ducked deeper into the grass and crawled along a shallow depression in the earth, moving as quietly as possible, praying he would not hear her frantic heartbeat. Step by excruciating step, she managed to circle around behind a cluster of rocks, out of Thorn's direct line of sight. Her breath came in short bursts, her heart pounding with adrenaline. She peeked around the edge of the rocks, seeing Thorn pause, his gaze scanning the moor. For a moment, she thought his eyes fixed on her hiding spot, and her stomach knotted. But he turned abruptly and began walking in the opposite direction, as though he had not caught her presence yet. Aveline wasted no time. She crept away, backtracking a good distance before attempting to skirt around the moor in a wide arc. Every sense was on high alert, each rustle of grass making her flinch. She was certain that if Thorn truly caught her trail, he would move with swift and unstoppable determination. The memory of his last words, of the fury in his voice, drove her onward, her feet stumbling on uneven ground. She told herself she had to keep running, that everything she desired hinged on staying free. Yet, with every pulse of her panicked heartbeat, she felt something else too. A quiet sorrow that it had come to this, that she was running from the one who was supposed to be her mate. She remembered the gentler moments, the times she had seen Thorn offer kindness to young wolves, the flicker of warmth in his gaze when he relaxed his alpha guard. It hurt more than she could admit to acknowledge that she had wanted him under different circumstances, if only their lives had aligned. She shrugged those thoughts down, compelling herself to focus on escape. As the last sliver of sunlight disappeared, she found temporary refuge in a hollow beneath a withered old tree. There, she huddled, straining her ears for any sign of pursuit. The wind swept across the moor, carrying a distant howl. She tensed. Was it Thorn, calling to her? Or was it some other wolf? She could not be sure. The haunting echo of that howl lingered in the air, and she pressed her palm against her mouth, stifling a sob. The bond still lived within them, battered but unbroken, reminding her that no matter how far she fled, some part of her would never truly escape him. Night settled in fully, cloaking the land in darkness. Aveline huddled in her makeshift shelter, her mind a tangle of conflicting emotions. She had outrun the Alpha for now, but she knew he was close, too close. Tension thrummed through her exhausted body as she tried to rest. She had no idea how many more days she could keep up this relentless run, always looking over her shoulder. Sooner or later, their paths would cross again. And when it happened, she did not know if she would have the strength to turn away a second time, or if the intensity of Thorn's need and her own buried desire would ignite a confrontation that could shatter them both. She gazed up at the pale moonlight seeping through the gnarled branches overhead, wishing she could shut off the bond's pull, wishing she did not still feel so much for the mate she had rejected. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she promised herself she would keep going, no matter the cost. She had chosen her path, and she would see it through. Far away in the darkness of the moor, Thorn lifted his muzzle, breathing in the night air. He thought he had sensed a fleeting hint of her scent earlier, a tantalizing sign that she was near, but it vanished as swiftly as it appeared. Frustration gnawed at him. His instincts told him she was close, yet he could not pinpoint her exact location. The moonlight reflected in his eyes as he let out a soft growl, a promise that he would not stop until he found her. He was not sure what he would do if he finally cornered her, but some part of him was certain that their story was far from over. Aveline crouched beneath the twisted branches, her breath held as she listened for any sound in the evening gloom. The moorland stretched all around her, a sea of tall, whispering grass and scattered boulders glistening under the faint starlight. Above her, the half-moon offered sparse illumination, and she kept her hood pulled low over her forehead as she peered into the shadows. It had been 2 days since she spotted Thorn prowling the edges of the moor, and her nerves still hadn't settled. She was certain he was somewhere close by, an ever-present danger to the freedom she refused to relinquish. Survival instincts dictated her steps. She moved only at dusk or dawn, resting in secluded places during the height of day to reduce the risk of detection. She hunted rabbits when possible, supplementing her diminishing supplies. Though the moor offered few hiding places, its vastness at least allowed her to choose paths that were off the beaten track, ensuring she left as little trace as possible. Each time a raven cawed overhead or a startled fox darted out of the grass, her heart lurched, fearing it might be a herald of Thorn's arrival. Yet despite the anxiety that dogged her every step, her resolve held firm. She would not surrender her life's ambitions because of a bond that felt more like a shackle than a blessing. After nightfall, when she judged the risk of discovery to be lower, she gathered her courage and ventured carefully through the terrain, trying to put more distance between herself and Thorn. The wind carried faint echoes, creaking tree limbs, the distant ripple of water in some unseen brook, even the occasional low growl of an animal on the prowl. She sharpened her hearing, recalling everything she had learned from the pack about stealth. The knowledge that Thorn was equally trained, if not more so, left her with a constant knot of worry. Still, she pressed on, heading for the western edge of the moor, where the land eventually sloped into rolling hills. She intended to navigate toward a region dotted with small towns that might be outside Thorn's sphere of influence. If she could reach them and blend in, perhaps she could finally slip out of his reach altogether. Thoughts of safety and anonymity spurred her forward, yet at the same time, the half-broken bond simmered in her chest, mocking her sense of triumph. She felt like a fugitive, condemned by her own nature. Wolves were not meant to roam alone, severed from their mates, and some primal corner of her spirit ached from that truth. When dawn crept across the horizon in glowing streaks of pink, Aveline spotted a cluster of stunted trees near a shallow ravine. She decided to take shelter there for the day, hoping to remain undiscovered. She used a fallen trunk as partial cover, spreading her cloak upon it to minimize her presence. The morning sun warmed the air enough that she could lie in half-slumber, her ears tuned for the faintest noise. She was drifting in and out of restless dreams, haunted by the memory of Thorn's eyes locked on hers, when a sudden crack of a branch jerked her awake. Tensing, she scanned the area. For a moment, she saw nothing beyond the dry grass quivering in the wind. Then, very faintly, she caught the sound of shuffling footfalls. With her heartbeat thundering, she remained perfectly still. Another minute passed, and she heard the footsteps grow more pronounced, accompanied by the soft murmur of voices. Whether they belonged to travelers or Thorn's hired men, she could not be sure. Unwilling to take chances, she gathered her cloak and melted back into the deeper shadows under the trunk, her entire body poised to flee or fight if necessary. She exhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to steady. Then she peered carefully around the edge of the fallen tree. To her relief, she saw two figures crossing the ravine several yards away, heading in a northeasterly direction. They didn't look like any of the mercenaries she had seen before in Riverbend. One was a lean man carrying a pack laden with what appeared to be cloth rolls, probably a traveling tailor or merchant. The other was a stockier figure wearing a floppy hat, trundling beside him. Their conversation was low and unintelligible from this distance, but they seemed wholly absorbed in their journey. Aveline stayed perfectly still until they disappeared into the wavering grass. Only after she was sure they were gone did she allow herself to relax. She released a breath and sagged against the trunk, letting the tension drain. The constant vigilance was taking its toll, leaving her on edge every waking moment. She yearned for a place to rest, truly rest, without fear of being found. Yet any notion of finding comfort soon reminded her that she was haunted by more than just Thorn's potential pursuit. The raw sense of loss gnawed at her when she least expected it, like now, in the hush of early morning. She wondered how he was coping with the rejection. If his mind tormented him with the same half-formed visions that troubled her. Part of her wanted to believe that he would eventually accept her decision, that his life would go on with the pack, that he would move past his heartbreak. But she remembered too well the grim determination in his eyes, and the way his voice shook with a mix of rage and grief. Alphas did not let go easily. Wolves in general struggled, but for an alpha, the bond carried an intensity that few could fathom. For the rest of that day, she remained in her hiding spot, dozing fitfully until evening shadows stretched once more across the land. The next dusk found her following a dry creek bed, heading west, her feet sinking into loose stones. She traveled for several hours, making slow but steady progress, until the land began to slope upward, revealing an expanse of windswept hills in the far distance. The moor's grasses gave way to rough, patchy terrain, littered with rock formations that cast long silhouettes under the moon. She appreciated the rocky outcroppings; they offered more places to conceal herself if danger arose. But as she climbed the rugged path, her thoughts drifted back to the memory of Thorn's near presence on the moor. It seemed almost surreal that she had outmaneuvered him, at least temporarily. Would her luck hold as she ventured into new territory? Or would the primal tether between them lead him straight to her door one night, with a single-minded purpose in his eyes? She shivered at the possibility, uncertain if she feared him or the bond more. She forced herself to remain focused on the present, and reached the crest of a sloping hill just after midnight. Below, a small valley opened up, thick with foliage and dotted with flickers of light, perhaps a tiny settlement. Unsure whether it was safe to approach, Aveline halted, crouching behind a boulder to study the area. A wooden fence encircled a few scattered cottages, their windows glowing faintly in the darkness. It seemed too small to be a proper town. Maybe it was just a rural farming community. If she approached carefully, she might find a chance to resupply. Yet the possibility of encountering more mercenaries or rumors about a rogue werewolf made her hesitate. Still, desperation pressed upon her. She needed proper food, medical supplies, and a place to rest. While she had not sustained any serious wounds, she carried the bruises of constant travel, her body weary from sleepless nights and tension. If she kept running without pause, she might collapse. So she decided to move closer, but only under the cover of full darkness. She waited until the moon dipped lower, clouds occasionally drifting across its surface, then made her way down the slope. The valley air smelled of damp earth, the sweet scent of night-blooming flowers, and the smoke of distant hearth fires. As she neared the rickety fence, she edged along its perimeter, peering cautiously at the cottages within. A small cluster of livestock pens lay to her left, and the silhouettes of cows or sheep stood quietly in the stillness. Only one cottage had a lamp burning in its window. The rest were dark and silent. She heard no voices or sounds of revelry, which suggested the residents were already asleep, or at least not gathered outdoors. Aveline knew she had to be swift. She slipped over the fence, landing softly on the other side. Then, hugging the shadows, she approached the largest cottage, where a small barn stood adjacent. She cracked the barn door open and slipped inside. The smell of hay and old wood filled her senses, and in the faint light from the cracks in the walls, she could see tack supplies hanging on pegs, a few sacks of grain, and some tools. It wasn't much, but it was shelter from the open night and prying eyes. If luck was on her side, she might find something she could bargain for, or quietly borrow, before morning. She found an empty stall near the back, scattered with musty straw. Taking off her cloak, she spread it on the floor to create a makeshift bed. Exhaustion tugged at her, but her nerves refused to settle. She had risked coming here, and she'd have to depart before dawn if she wanted to avoid detection. As she considered her next steps, her mind drifted back to the pack. She thought of old friends who must now know she was gone, and possibly the reason for her departure. She wondered if they sympathized with her choice, or found it bewildering that anyone would reject a mate bond, especially with the Alpha. She wondered if Aveline was trying to maintain order while Thorn scoured the land for her. The swirl of questions made her press her palms to her temples, willing herself to calm. She was here for rest, for survival. She wouldn't let guilt or yearning drag her into the past. Despite her best intentions to stay awake and vigilant, fatigue claimed her in fits and starts. She woke often, each time startled by some rustling noise. A rat scurrying in the rafters or the distant moan of the wind against the barn's boards. But no one came to investigate, so she managed to piece together a few hours of uneasy rest. Shortly before dawn, she rose, rolling her stiff shoulders to work out the kinks. She replaced her cloak, brushing off bits of straw, then slipped quietly through the barn door to scout around. The lightning sky showed a small well near the cottage, and she tiptoed toward it. A wooden bucket rested at the well's edge, and she quickly filled her water skin, grateful for the cold, fresh liquid sliding down her throat. She dared to check if the cottage door was bolted. It was. The windows were shuttered, though the faintest glow of a hearth could be seen through a gap. She considered knocking, offering to do chores in exchange for some bread or fruit, but fear of being recognized held her back. She had no idea whether rumors of her flight had spread here. Her safest option was to leave quietly. Yet as she retreated, her gaze fell upon a small storage shed behind the cottage. The door was ajar, and inside, she saw rows of shelves lined with produce, jars of preserves, and baskets of dried goods. Her stomach rumbled at the sight. The idea of stealing made her grimace, for she had no quarrel with these people. But her coin was nearly gone, and the gnaw of hunger was relentless. She could leave a token of some sort, a gesture of apology. She rummaged in her bag for anything valuable, a trinket or heirloom that might compensate for a bit of food. Her fingers closed around a small carved wooden pendant she had brought from the Pack territory. It was shaped like a stylized wolf howling at a moon, something she had treasured since childhood. The memory of home pricked her eyes with tears, but necessity outweighed sentiment, so she swallowed her misgivings and slipped into the shed. In the dimness, she selected a small portion of dried apples and a small hunk of bread, wrapping them in a scrap of cloth. In return, she placed the wooden pendant on the shelf. It wasn't worth much coin, but perhaps it would mean something to someone who recognized its craftsmanship. A quiet apology tumbled through her mind as she shut the shed door, her footsteps carrying her away. She left the valley behind, crossing the fence once again to continue west. The next 2 days were a grueling test of endurance. She walked through rolling foothills, stony paths, and narrow valleys, doing her best to avoid any sign of civilization. Whenever she saw smoke rising from a chimney in the distance, she skirted wide around it, preferring the hardships of rough terrain over the risk of more encounters. Her hunger ebbed and flowed, relieved by whatever small game she could snare. The dryness in her throat reminded her of just how precious each sip of water had become, so she kept an eye out for streams and kept her water skin as full as possible. All the while, she remained unsettled by a persistent feeling that Thorn was growing closer, that an unseen hand of fate was drawing them inevitably toward each other. The bond might have been partially severed by her rejection, but it was not destroyed. She could sense its presence, like a faint hum in the marrow of her bones, an energy that flickered to life whenever she let her thoughts wander too long. She loathed how it exposed her vulnerability, how it made her yearn for something she had deliberately cast aside. And yet, try as she might, she could not banish it completely. Early on the 3rd day after leaving the valley, she noticed that the terrain began to climb in elevation. The air grew crisper, and the horizon revealed a rugged mountain range. Snow-capped peaks glinted in the distance, their slopes covered in thick pine forests. Although she felt a tremor of trepidation at the idea of crossing such a formidable barrier, she also sensed an opportunity. Traveling through the mountains would be dangerous, but it might grant her a true escape route, one that even the most persistent pursuer would struggle to follow. By midday, she found herself in a dense coniferous forest at the base of the foothills. The canopy of needles overhead cast shifting patterns of shadow and light. She paused by a cool mountain stream to drink and wash the grime from her face, feeling a fleeting moment of relief. Standing there, eyes closed, she allowed the gentle trickle of water to soothe her frayed nerves. For the first time in days, she felt almost at peace, away from prying eyes and relentless pursuit. She was about to sip from the waterskin one last time when her senses prickled in warning. She froze, listening. At first, she heard only the quiet rush of the stream and the soft whisper of wind through the pines. Then, a twig snapped, her breath hitched. Her wolf's side roared to attention, adrenaline igniting her limbs. Placing the waterskin aside, she silently crept behind a large cedar trunk, peering through the greenery. A figure stepped into view, only a few yards from the stream's edge. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark cloak that partially concealed rugged features. Thorn. Even from that distance, she felt the weight of his presence, the gravitational pull that had always set him apart. Her pulse fluttered, and she quickly stifled the panicked gasp that threatened to escape her lips. She watched him kneel at the stream and cup water into his hands, splashing it over his face. He looked haggard, as though he had traveled without rest for days. His hair, normally neat, was tangled. Shadows lined his eyes, and he carried an air of desperation that matched the rumors of alphas gone mad with heartbreak. She feared that was exactly what was happening to him, a gradual unraveling caused by her rejection. For a moment, she stood torn between confronting him or sneaking away. She knew she could not trust him to release her if he found her. His possessive instincts might override any rational promise he had once made. Yet part of her hated to see him this way, exhausted and haunted, paying a high price for a bond that she had cast aside. She could almost feel his inner torment radiating across the clearing. As Thorn finished drinking, he stood and tilted his head, inhaling deeply. The moment his nostrils flared, her stomach lurched. Had he caught her scent? Panic seized her. She pressed her back against the cedar, every muscle tense. She wondered if she had left any trace around the stream, if the wind had shifted. The slightest shift in the breeze could carry her scent right to him. Seconds stretched painfully. Thorn's posture sharpened, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the forest. His entire being seemed to vibrate with sudden energy. Aveline's pulse thundered. Slowly, he began walking along the stream, scanning the trees. He took a step closer to her hidden spot, and she thought her heart would burst from her chest. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she weighed her options. Run or face him? At the last instant, an animal scurried through the underbrush on the opposite bank, likely a fox or a hare. Thorn's attention snapped in that direction. Aveline seized the distraction. She backed away from the cedar, moving as silently as she could over the damp, pine-covered ground. Each step was an eternity, each breath a battle with panic, but she knew this might be her only chance. Within moments, she slipped deeper into the forest, using the thick clusters of trees as cover. She could not run outright. Any sudden noise would alert him. Instead, she moved in slow, careful increments, each step measured to avoid snapping a twig or crunching needles. Her chest was so tight she thought she might faint from lack of air. When she finally put enough distance between herself and the stream, she picked up her pace, desperation fueling her adrenaline. She sensed that Thorn was alert, that he knew she was near, though he had not spotted her. She had to lose him again. Force him to chase a phantom trail through the labyrinth of pine trees until she was long gone. She could not afford a direct confrontation. She was not strong enough, emotionally or physically, to hold her own against a determined alpha. At last she broke into a loping run, ignoring the scrape of branches against her arms. Her lungs burned from the exertion, and her heart hammered with raw fear. She half expected him to barrel out from behind a tree at any moment, wrestle her to the ground, demand that she return with him. But the forest remained eerily still, apart from her own frenzied flight. Soon the slope grew steeper, and she stumbled, nearly tumbling over loose rocks. She caught herself and pressed on until she reached a precarious ridge that overlooked a steep valley draped in mist. Breathing heavily, she paused on the ridge, gazing down at the daunting descent. She had no map, no clear plan for how to navigate these mountains. But her only alternative was risking a confrontation with Thorn if she stayed in the lower forest. Summoning her courage, she started the perilous descent, choosing her footing carefully. Rocks clattered as she dislodged them, echoing across the silent valley. Step by trembling step, she picked her way down. The shadows of towering evergreens enveloped her, and her lungs filled with the biting chill of high-altitude air. By the time she reached the bottom, her legs shook with exertion, and her palms were raw from clutching at rough surfaces to keep her balance. She looked up, marveling that she had not cracked her skull on the way. The ridge loomed overhead, like a wall separating her from any pursuer. For now, she felt safer, though the stillness of the valley carried its own eerie note. Wisps of fog clung to the ground, coiling around the tree trunks. She did not linger, pushing into the deeper forest to conceal herself. Once she found a hollow beneath the exposed roots of a massive pine, she crawled inside, ignoring the damp chill, and sank into a crouch. Her pulse was still racing, her breath ragged. Only then did she allow the rush of adrenaline to subside, and with its departure came a crushing wave of sorrow. She pressed her forehead against her knees, trembling as she fought back tears. The bond tugged at her, reminding her of the heartbreak in Thorn's eyes, the ragged look of his features when she glimpsed him by the stream. She had wanted freedom above all else, yet this cat-and-mouse chase felt like it was fracturing them both. Fear, sorrow, regret, and longing crashed into her, leaving her chest tight. She closed her eyes, thinking back to the first time she realized she was destined to be the Alpha's mate. She had never felt so simultaneously elated and trapped, the knowledge that he was chosen for her, clashing with her dreams of wandering far from the pack. Could there have been another way? A compromise that did not force them into this destructive pattern. Her heart twisted at the thought that maybe she had been too hasty, that she had let her fear overshadow any possibility of forging a life with Thorn. But it was too late for regrets now. She was too far down this path to turn back. Her arms wrapped around herself as she murmured a silent plea to whoever might be listening, for a sign, for guidance, for anything to end this agony. But only the cold hush of the valley answered. She tried to convince herself that once she passed through the mountains, she could find a different life, one that matched her ambitions. Perhaps she could settle in a distant land, become someone new, unburdened by the mate bond. The possibility felt remote, but it was all she had. For a long while, she stayed hidden among the pine roots, letting the sobs subside into quiet sniffles. Eventually, the pragmatic side of her mind took over. She needed shelter for the night. She needed a better vantage point to plan her route across the mountains. Most of all, she needed to keep moving. Restoring her composure, she crept out from under the roots and surveyed the valley's dim interior. She spotted a faint trail weaving around the base of the mountain, leading upward again in a jagged path. It might be risky, but following any defined trail was her best chance of finding a pass through the rugged peaks. She set off, stepping cautiously to avoid twisted roots and slippery stones. The terrain grew increasingly rough, with thick clusters of undergrowth snagging her pants. The slope rose sharply at times, forcing her to scramble. Occasionally, she glimpsed a break in the trees, revealing the granite faces of towering cliffs overhead. The sheer scale of the mountains humbled her. She had never traveled so far from the packlands before, and she felt like a lone intruder in a domain ruled by wind and stone. By late afternoon, she found a narrow clearing near a tumbling waterfall where she decided to rest. The cascade sent a gentle spray into the air, and she drank deeply from the pool at its base, relishing the crisp, cold taste. Her reflection in the water startled her. A weary visage with shadows under her eyes, hair tangled, cheeks hollow. This was not how she had pictured her grand adventure. She had imagined crossing boundaries with a light heart, brimming with curiosity, not skulking through the wilderness like a fugitive. But regrets would not help her survive. Gritting her teeth, she splashed water on her face and stood. She was about to continue further when an unmistakable sensation rippled across her senses. The hair on her arms stood on end, and a fierce jolt tingled at the base of her skull. It was the echo of the mate bond, resonating in her wolf spirit, telling her that Thorn was near, terrifyingly near. The surge of adrenaline nearly made her drop her water skin. She spun around, scanning the shadows. A shape emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, tall and unyielding. Thorn stood there, his expression unreadable, and her heart lurched as every muscle tensed for flight. She considered bolting, but fatigue clung to her body, and the predator's focus in Thorn's stance indicated he would not let her slip away a second time. Desperation flared in her eyes. She backed up until her shoulder blades pressed against the cold, wet stone of the waterfall's rocky lip. The mist soaked her hair as she faced him, breath catching in her throat. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on unhinged. "Aveline." His voice was husky, rough with suppressed emotions. She swallowed, her own words dying on her lips. She had spent weeks of running, hiding, and second-guessing, anticipating this moment. Yet no plan came to mind now that he stood before her. He advanced another step. His voice caught, and frustration danced across his features. She could see the swirl of emotions behind his eyes, rage, grief, longing, and an undercurrent of something else, something desperate. "I had been looking everywhere. Do you have any idea what this has done to me, to the pack?" A part of her wanted to plead for him to see reason, to let her go, but she could hardly form a coherent thought. Her eyes flicked to his chest, noticing the ragged tear in his shirt, a fresh bruise darkening near his collarbone. He looked just as exhausted as she felt, yet an unbreakable determination hardened his gaze. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to speak. "Thorn, please, you need to let me go. This bond is tearing us both apart. I never wanted this life. I can't go back." His jaw tightened. "I knew what you said. You think I'm going to accept that after I've tracked you across half the kingdom." His voice rose with a ragged edge, and his hands clenched at his sides. "You think you can just vanish, leave me with this scar in my soul and expect me to walk away like none of it mattered?" She had expected anger, possibly even violence. But the raw anguish in his voice bruised her heart. She tried to steady herself against the waterfall's slippery rock, meeting his eyes despite the fear that churned in her belly. I never wanted to hurt you, but my life, my dreams, I won't sacrifice them. The bond doesn't give you the right to decide my future. He let out a bitter laugh that held no humor. You talk about the bond as though it's some flimsy thing. This is destiny, Aveline. It's in our very blood. Do you know what happens to an alpha when his mate tears away from him? His voice cracked, and he stepped closer, the water from the falls dampening his boots. I've felt it. Every day. This slow, gnawing pain. Like my wolf is ripping itself to pieces. Maybe you think I deserve it for wanting to claim you, but it's not something I can turn off. Her throat constricted with guilt, yet she raised her chin. I understand, but I can't live under the constant demands of the pack, tethered to a role that goes against everything I've ever wanted. If you truly loved me, you would respect my choice, not hunt me down. His expression darkened, and she sensed the precarious balance of his wolf side, caged by a tenuous control. Love? He repeated softly. I do love you. In the way a wolf loves its mate. But my instincts demand I protect you, keep you close. You have no idea how torturous it has been to sense your presence always out of reach, to know you're facing rogues, dangers, the wilderness alone. She shook her head, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. I can take care of myself. I've survived so far. What you call protection feels more like a prison to me. I can't and won't go back with you. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he fought for composure. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, swallowing hard, torn between fury and heartbreak. So that's it? You'll never return to the pack? You'll keep running until I'm left chasing your ghost? I wish I had a different answer, but I don't, she whispered. I'm sorry. He stood there, gaze burning, water droplets misting around him, the hush of the waterfall filling the silence. Her entire body trembled with apprehension. She half expected him to lunge, to seize her by force. For an agonizing moment, she thought he would. His eyes flashed gold in the subdued light, his wolf bristling to take control. Then, slowly, he exhaled. She watched in disbelief as he unclenched his fists, his shoulders sagging in defeat. You're so certain, he said, the words nearly lost beneath the cascade's roar. I've tried to think of ways we might have a life together, tried to compromise in my head 1,000 times, but every scenario ends with me tethered to the pack, and you resenting me for it. Is that truly what you believe? She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Yes. I've given it thought every day, and it always circles back to the same problem. My dreams are out there, not within the confines of pack boundaries. His face contorted as though he had been struck. Silence fell, thick with mutual pain. Then he turned, stepping away from her, raking a hand across his face as though to wipe away tears or fury, she couldn't be sure. She saw his shoulders rise and fall in short, ragged breaths. The distance between them was less than a few steps, but it felt like an impassable chasm. In a haunted voice, he spoke again. If I let you go, if I truly let you go, I don't know if I can survive that. Alphas don't cope well with rejection. Our wolves, my wolf, will never be complete without you. But the thought of forcing you to stay, seeing the hatred in your eyes, might destroy me faster. Aveline's chest ached with the weight of heartbreak. She knew how deeply the mate bond cut, how refusal could leave wounds that never fully healed. But she had no answer for him that would alleviate his suffering. She wanted to reassure him, to wrap him in comfort. But doing so would only chain her to a life she didn't want. The cruelty of that truth left her breathless. The hush between them grew unbearable. Finally, Thorn turned back to face her, his eyes bearing the sorrow of a lifetime. "I don't have it in me to fight you anymore," he admitted, voice strained. "You've made it clear you won't surrender, no matter what I say. Maybe, I can't change your mind. But I can't just say goodbye, either." A wave of confusion swept through her. She wiped tears from her cheeks. "Then what do you want?" He held her gaze, his expression haunted yet strangely resolute. "Give me one night. Just one. Let me travel with you, see how you live beyond the pack's reach. Let me keep you safe, at least for a little while. After that, if you still insist on going alone, I'll step aside." She stared at him, trying to discern any trick or hidden motive. Yet the rawness in his eyes told her he was speaking from a place of desperation, not deception. Her instincts screamed that staying near him was dangerous, that the pull of the bond might overwhelm her. But another part of her sympathized. She had never wanted to reduce him to this state of torment. Was one night too much to offer, especially if it might buy her permanent freedom afterward? "You promise you won't try to drag me back?" she asked, her voice trembling with distrust and sorrow. He took a moment to respond, as though the words pained him. "I promise," he said at last. "My beta can handle the pack for a little longer. I've already left them in her care. This is personal." She felt her pulse throb. Could she dare believe him? The look on his face reminded her of times she had seen him speak an oath at the pack council, steadfast, unwavering. If he was lying, she would see it. "Oh, right," she answered slowly, her voice barely audible above the waterfall's crashing. "One night. We share a camp, and then we part ways. After that, no more chasing." Thorn bowed his head, releasing a shaky breath that might have been relief. "Thank you," he rasped. For an instant, she glimpsed gratitude flicker in his eyes. "I'll keep my word." She swallowed, stepping away from the slippery rocks. Her head swirled with the enormity of her concession. In a way, it felt like the final chord in a sorrowful symphony, a chance to end their entanglement with at least a semblance of understanding. Even so, apprehension coiled in her belly. The bond hummed within her, still potent, still capable of making her doubt her decisions. One misstep, and she might fall into a trap of her own emotions. But as Thorn stood there, soaked in heartbreak, she could not shut out her compassion entirely. "Let's find somewhere safer," she murmured, carefully keeping her distance. "Nightfall is close, and this place is too exposed." He nodded, pushing damp hair from his eyes. "Lead the way." No further words passed between them as they left the waterfall's ledge, forging deeper into the mountain forest together. A thick tension clung to every step, and Aveline fought the urge to glance over her shoulder, half expecting him to leap at her the moment she let down her guard. But he remained a few paces behind, watchful, silent. They settled on a narrow glade near a ring of pines where the ground was relatively flat. Aveline scouted the perimeter for any signs of predators or precarious terrain before allowing herself to set down her gear. The hush of the forest weighed on her, and when she turned, Thorn was studying her with an intensity that made her pulse jump. She tore her gaze away, busying herself with gathering kindling for a small fire. He helped, though they spoke few words. Once the fire crackled to life, bathing the glade in orange flickers, they sat on opposite sides. Aveline pressed her back against a tree trunk, hugging her knees to her chest. Thorn rested his forearms on his thighs, staring into the flames. The tension between them was nearly suffocating, a swirl of regret, longing, and wariness that neither could dispel. An unspoken pact seemed to emerge. They would coexist here for this one night, without resurrecting the same argument that had driven them to a bitter chase. They both needed the reprieve. The hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood and the distant hoot of an owl. Sometimes, Aveline caught Thorn's gaze flicking over to her, as if to verify she was still there. She refused to hold his eye for long, fearing the bond might roar to life and betray her determination. At some point, Thorn shifted, wincing at the bruise on his collarbone. Compassion stirred in her, and she bit her lip, torn. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Do you want me to look at that?" He glanced down, as if noticing his injury for the first time. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his jaw clenched. "I've had worse." His pride was expected, but Aveline found herself rising anyway, rummaging in her bag for an herbal salve she carried. She moved around the fire, extending the small tin toward him. "Let me see," she insisted, her voice unsteady. No sense in letting it get worse. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but he relented, tugging the torn fabric aside. The bruise was dark, a patch of angry purple spread across his upper chest. She knelt, inhaling sharply at the evidence of how hard his search had been, how many obstacles he must have encountered. He stayed tense as she gently applied the salve, the faint pine mint scent drifting in the night air. A strange hush enveloped them as her fingers brushed his skin. The bond stirred, awareness crackling between them. She tried to ignore the way her heart hammered, focusing on the healing gesture. Thorn closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, as though struggling to maintain composure. When she was done, she pulled away quickly, returning to her side of the fire. Neither spoke of it, but a current of emotion lingered in the clearing like static electricity. Hours later, the fire had dwindled to embers, and night draped its cloak over the forest. Thorn dozed fitfully, his posture slumped, while Aveline remained restless, leaning against the pine trunk. She watched him in the faint glow, noting the shadows under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion etched on his face. She had never seen him look so worn. As Alpha, he had always appeared strong, in control, but now he was a man stretched beyond his limits. Guilt flared again, warring with her conviction that she had done the right thing for her own future. At last, she allowed her heavy eyelids to close. She slept in fragments, haunted by half-dreams, where she and Thorn stood at the pack's edge, parted by an insurmountable gulf. Sometimes she saw the pack territory in flames, as if someone's rage had ignited everything. Other times, she saw a vision of him alone on a moonlit road, calling her name with a desperation that tore at her heart. When dawn broke, pale light seeping through the canopy, they rose in awkward silence. Aveline busied herself extinguishing the embers, while Thorn stood on the perimeter of the glade, arms crossed. Tension prickled between them once more, for they both sensed the hour of decision had arrived. When the fire was thoroughly out, she turned to face him, steeling herself for whatever came next. "You said you would let me go," she said softly, crossing her arms over her chest. Her voice did not shake, but her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. "One night has passed." He held her gaze, grief carving deep lines around his mouth. "I remember my promise. I won't force you." He drew in a breath that sounded painful. "But answer me honestly. Do you feel nothing for me? Not even a flicker of what fate intended for us?" She winced at the question, because the truth was not so simple. "I feel the bond," she admitted, voice trembling. "I feel sadness, regret, a pull I can't deny. But it doesn't change my choice. I've fought it for so long because I want to live on my terms." He looked away, jaw tight. Then my answer is the same. I won't cage you. If you truly want to leave, I'll hold to my word and step aside. He paused, turning back to her, eyes shining with anguish. But know this, you carry my heart with you, whether you want it or not. I can't promise I'll ever get over it. Tears threatened to well in her eyes, but she willed them down, nodding shakily. Then we part ways. I hope you find peace someday, Thorn. His lips twitched in a sad imitation of a smile. And I hope you find the freedom you crave. He stepped forward as if to approach her, then thought better of it, halting. Instead, he bowed his head, the gesture of final, silent farewell. Without another word, he pivoted and walked away through the pines. She stood rooted to the spot, watching his tall, solitary figure vanish amid the boles of dark trees. Each step of his retreat echoed in her heart, like a final coda in a melody of loss. When she was certain he was gone, she exhaled, her chest shuddering. She told herself that this was what she wanted: freedom from the pack, from the bond, from the suffocating role that awaited her if she stayed. But the fresh ache that unfurled within her made her question everything. She stood there for a long time, tears sliding unchecked down her cheeks, before finally turning her face to the morning sun. If she lingered, she risked him changing his mind or her own resolve weakening. So she gathered her belongings, adjusting her cloak, and set off into the forest. Each step felt like a betrayal of her own heart, yet she forced herself to continue. The mountains beckoned, a formidable challenge awaiting her. She steeled herself for the hardships, telling herself it was the only way to carve out the life she had yearned for. Yet no matter how resolute she tried to be, the memory of Thorn's tortured eyes lingered, an indelible mark on her soul. Aveline followed the mountain paths for days, ascending gradually across rocky trails and through pine-scented valleys. Each time she stopped for water or rest, she was reminded of that final morning with Thorn, when he had let her leave rather than imprison her in a destiny she had never wanted. She wrestled with the swirl of guilt and relief, uncertain which emotion dominated. Despite her sorrow, she found a renewed sense of purpose in forging ahead, finally free from pursuit. She traveled steadily upward, venturing into higher altitudes where the air was colder and snow clung to the shaded crevices of the cliffs. Occasionally, she spotted mountain goats perched on ledges, gazing at her with curious eyes. Eagles circled overhead, their cries echoing across the ridges. She paused now and then to marvel at the breathtaking vistas, rolling valleys below, shimmering in the distance, and the stark, proud peaks of the range rising into the clouds. Yes, she was exhausted, but a small flame of wonder and adventure burned in her chest, urging her to keep climbing. At night, she scouted sheltered spots under rocky overhangs or near gnarled evergreens. She would build a small fire if wood was available, warming her stiff fingers, reflecting on how far she had come from the packlands. She had once pictured journeys filled with laughter, new friends, and thrilling discoveries. Instead, she carried a constant heaviness. Her dreams were overshadowed by the knowledge of what she had sacrificed and the pain she had inflicted on Thorn. But she told herself she would find her stride eventually, that she needed time to heal from the heartbreak. If this was the price of freedom, she could only hope it led somewhere meaningful. Days turned into weeks. She managed to traverse the mountain passes through a combination of persistence, cautious planning, and the occasional mercy of good weather. She encountered a few wanderers, a pair of traveling siblings searching for rare herbs, an elderly hunter who nodded in polite greeting, but none stayed near her for long, and she was reluctant to socialize. She worried word might slip that she was a werewolf traveling alone, possibly a rogue. Finally, after many grueling miles, she found a descending trail on the western side of the range. From a vantage point atop a ridge, she gazed down at sprawling lowlands bathed in a hazy golden light. She could make out a wide river snaking through the plains, with small settlements dotting its banks. Her chest tightened at the thought of returning to more populous areas. But she needed supplies, and she was determined to find a place where she could start fresh. Maybe a distant city, or a foreign land across the sea, somewhere she could vanish into anonymity, building a life that matched her aspirations. She made her way down the winding path, skirting precarious switchbacks carved into the mountainside. The air warmed noticeably as she descended, and her lungs felt relief from the thin, high-altitude atmosphere. By the time she reached the base, the forest had mellowed into thick groves of leafy trees, with sunlight filtering through a lush canopy. Birds called overhead, and the occasional scurry of small creatures reminded her that this region was far more alive than the desolate heights. She followed the sound of rushing water until she reached the great river. Its banks were lined with smooth stones, and she filled her waterskin gratefully, splashing her face and arms to wash away the accumulated dust. A sigh escaped her lips, a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. She had survived the treacherous climb, and now she stood on the threshold of new possibilities. If fate was kind, she might find a friendly settlement soon, one where she could trade for fresh clothing and maybe secure legitimate work. With the sun dipping lower in the sky, she made camp near a stand of willow trees. The mild air felt almost alien after the mountain chill. She found comfort in the gentle rustle of leaves overhead, the soft lullaby of the river's current. That night, she slept deeply, untroubled by nightmares for the first time in what felt like an eternity. When dawn broke, she rose with renewed energy, ready to seek out whatever lay ahead. She walked alongside the river for hours, passing through clusters of wildflowers and tall grasses. The land here was fertile, with tilled fields visible in the distance. At midday, she spotted a solitary farmhouse near a bend in the river. Smoke curled from its chimney, and a few cows grazed lazily in a pen. Aveline hesitated, not wanting to alarm the occupants, but the thought of a proper meal, and maybe some direction, compelled her to take a risk. Her supplies were nearly depleted, and she had only faint hopes of finding a town if she did not gather information first. Approaching slowly, she raised her hands in a non-threatening gesture. A middle-aged woman emerged from the house, a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders. She regarded Aveline with a mix of caution and curiosity. "Morning," she called, squinting. "You're a traveler?" Aveline nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yes. I'm passing through, heading west. I was hoping to learn if there's a town nearby. Maybe somewhere I could trade or buy supplies?" The woman pursed her lips, studying Aveline's ragged appearance. "There's a market town a few miles downriver. Follow the path behind those willow stands. Keep going until you see a wooden bridge, and you'll reach it by sundown. They have an inn, blacksmith, general store, everything a traveler might need. Just watch out for bandits, though I haven't heard of much trouble lately." Aveline exhaled, relief flickering across her face. "Thank you," she said, and then hesitated. "I don't have much coin. Do you know if the innkeeper would accept labor in exchange for a night's lodging?" The woman gave a good-natured shrug. "He might, if you're willing to wash dishes or clean. Folk in that town are practical. Coin's not the only way to pay, so long as you're honest." She paused, eyeing Aveline's weary features with a gentler look. "If you're hungry, I can spare some bread and cheese for the road." Warmth swelled in Aveline's chest. She had grown so accustomed to suspicion and danger that this simple act of kindness touched her deeply. "That's generous of you," she replied softly. I appreciate it." The woman disappeared into the house and returned moments later with a small wrapped bundle. "Safe travels," she offered. "May you find good fortune in the West." With heartfelt gratitude, Aveline accepted the food, gave a final thanks, and continued along the path. Despite everything, the encounter lifted her spirits, a reminder that not everyone in the world viewed strangers with hostility. She clutched the bundle to her chest, inhaling the fresh scent of baked bread. For a brief moment she felt almost optimistic about the journey ahead. She followed the woman's directions, weaving through a gentle trail flanked by willows that offered occasional shade. True to the woman's word, the path eventually revealed a sturdy wooden bridge spanning the broad river. Afternoon light glimmered on the water's surface, and beyond the bridge, Aveline glimpsed a scatter of rooftops. Eager to reach civilization before nightfall, she pressed on. As she entered the outskirts of the town, she noted a modest wooden sign reading Felwick. Timber-framed buildings lined a central road, and a few merchants had set up stalls in a small marketplace, hawking produce and goods. The bustle was subdued yet comfortable. People went about their daily tasks, greeting neighbors, exchanging coin, or bartering. Aveline kept her hood low, not wanting to attract undue attention to her features. She felt the old worry of being recognized or questioned about her origins, but none of the townsfolk so much as paused. They seemed accustomed to occasional wanderers passing through. She made her way toward a building with a hand-painted sign reading Riverside Inn. The structure was larger than most in Felwick, with a welcoming porch and a stable beside it. Stepping inside, she found a modest common room, half a dozen tables, and the pleasant aroma of soup wafting from a kitchen area. A rotund man stood behind the counter, wiping mugs with a rag. He looked up and gave her a polite nod. "Evening, traveler," he greeted. "Looking for a meal or a room?" Aveline dipped her head in greeting. "Both, if possible," she replied. "But I have limited coin. I'm willing to do chores or help in the kitchen for a night's stay." The innkeeper set down the mug and rag, leaning forward on the counter. He studied her a moment, perhaps noting her worn attire and exhausted eyes, then gave a kind-hearted grunt. "We're not so large here that we turn away good labor. If you wash dishes tonight and help tidy up, I'll give you a corner room and a hot meal. Does that suit?" Relief flooded her. "Yes, thank you." She shifted her pack. "I can start right away if you like." He waved a hand. "Take a seat first. I'll bring you some stew. You look like you could use it. After that, my daughter can show you to the kitchen." Aveline's chest tightened at the unexpected generosity. She managed a small smile and settled at an empty table near the corner of the common room. True to his word, the innkeeper soon delivered a steaming bowl of vegetable stew, along with a hunk of bread. Her stomach rumbled in anticipation, and she thanked him before digging in. The simple flavors were heavenly, reminding her of warmth and safety she hadn't felt in weeks. Each spoonful seemed to chase away the chill of the mountains and the perpetual edge of fear that had shadowed her. She was nearly finished when an adolescent girl approached her, likely the innkeeper's daughter. The girl had braided hair and a friendly grin. "Pa says you'll be working in the kitchen?" she asked. "I can show you around whenever you're ready." Nodding, Aveline stood, wiping her mouth. "Thank you. Let's get started." The girl led her into a humble kitchen, where a single cook stirred a pot over a hearth. Stacks of wooden bowls and plates stood nearby. Soot had darkened the beams overhead, and a faint odor of onion and herbs lingered in the warm air. Without wasting time, Aveline rolled up her sleeves and began washing the dirty dishes, scrubbing away remnants of food from the day's meals. The innkeeper's daughter helped by bringing her stacks to clean and refilling a basin with hot water. It was mindless, repetitive work, exactly what Aveline needed to keep her thoughts from wandering to Thorn. She toiled until the sun sank low and the cook served the last patrons for the evening. Despite her weariness, she found a certain contentment in the routine. The girl, whose name was Tara, chatted amiably about life in Felwick. She mentioned that the town was mostly farmers, tradespeople, and a few craftsfolk. Travelers came and went, especially during trading season, but it was seldom a place where rumors of distant packs reached. Aveline listened politely, feeling relief that this seemed a safe corner of the realm, a haven from the turmoil she had left behind. By the time the kitchen was in order, the innkeeper reappeared with a grateful smile. "Well done. Let me show you your room." He guided her up a narrow staircase to a small chamber at the end of a hallway. Inside was a single bed tucked with a modest quilt, a wash basin, and a tiny window overlooking the street. It might have been plain, but to Aveline, it looked like luxury after so many nights in the wild. "Thank you," she said softly, setting her pack down. "I appreciate your hospitality more than I can say." He nodded in acknowledgement. "We've all needed a hand at some point. Get some rest. If you plan to stay longer, we can figure out arrangements tomorrow." Once he left, Aveline sank onto the bed, letting out a sigh. Her muscles ached pleasantly from honest labor, and her mind felt lighter than it had in a long while. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm night, and the faint glow of moonlight slipped through the window. For the first time since she fled the pack, she was neither running nor hiding, just living, if only for a moment. That night, her dreams were less turbulent. She still glimpsed Thorn's face in half-formed images, but the jagged edges of fear and guilt felt somewhat blunted. She stirred at dawn, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings, before remembering where she was. Rising, she splashed water on her face from the basin, then changed into slightly fresher clothes from her pack. Her reflection in the cracked mirror revealed a woman hardened by hardship but not entirely broken. She tried to summon a small, encouraging smile, telling herself she could forge a new life here or somewhere beyond. After breakfast, the innkeeper offered her a paying job for as long as she wanted: light housekeeping, dishwashing, helping Tara with errands. It was an unexpected opportunity, and Aveline felt both relieved and uncertain. She had promised herself to travel far, see the world, chase bigger dreams. Settling here felt like a compromise, but at least it was her choice, made freely and without the looming threat of an alpha's claim. Perhaps she could stay for a short while, build up coin, then continue her journey whenever she was ready. The days rolled by in a gentle routine. She rose early to help in the kitchen, served travelers when they arrived, washed linens, and ran small errands around Felwick. Though her tasks were simple, she earned a modest wage and a comfortable place to sleep. In the evenings, she found herself laughing with Tara over silly mishaps in the kitchen, or listening to stories from wandering merchants who stopped at the inn. Each day that passed without a hint of pursuit soothed her nerves further. She caught herself smiling more often, a gradual healing of the rawness in her spirit. Still, the bond remained a quiet presence. Sometimes at night, she would feel an ache in her chest, remembering how she and Thorn had once been enthralled by the awareness of each other. She had believed that the heartbreak might lessen if she was far enough away, but the bond's phantom tug never fully disappeared. It was simply muted, overshadowed by the everyday cadence of her life in Felwick. She told herself it was enough, that people carried old wounds and still managed to move on. She was no different. Weeks turned into a month, and she began to wonder if she might remain here longer than planned. Felwick's slow rhythm was not the grand adventure she had once envisioned, but it offered a sense of belonging she had lost when she fled the pack. The townsfolk were friendly, though not intrusive. She enjoyed small pleasures, picking wildflowers by the riverside, sampling the orchard fruit sold at the marketplace, watching the sunset cast orange and purple ribbons across the sky. Sometimes she would stroll through the meadows, letting her wolf senses roam, though she was careful never to shift in plain sight. She even considered renting a little cottage on the outskirts, a place of her own where she could store the books and souvenirs she hoped to collect one day. Yet late one afternoon, as she helped Tara clear the tables in the common room, a strange prickle traveled up her spine. She glanced around, but the room was mostly empty save for a lone patron finishing a pint. Something felt amiss, and she murmured an excuse to Tara before stepping outside. The late-day sun bathed the dusty street in golden light, and a gentle breeze rustled the wooden sign over the inn's door. A handful of townsfolk went about their business, but no one seemed out of place. She walked around the side of the inn, scanning for anything unusual. That was when she noticed a figure leaning against a post near the stable, partially obscured by shadows. The shape was large, tall, an imposing silhouette. Her heart lurched. She took a step closer, squinting. The figure shifted slightly, revealing a face she recognized. Fawn. A chill washed over her, all the breath leaving her lungs. She froze in place, staring at him. He wore a plain shirt and travel-worn trousers, his cloak folded over one arm. His posture was tense, as though he had been waiting. Their eyes locked, and she saw a flicker of agony in his gaze before he pushed away from the post and stepped into the light. 100 thoughts assaulted her mind. How had he found her? Why had he come? Had he broken his promise? Fear, anger, and a strange undercurrent of unwanted excitement coiled in her stomach. She backed away, every instinct screaming to run, but her limbs felt unsteady. Her voice trembled when she finally managed to speak. "You, what are you doing here? You said you would let me go." He nodded slowly, anguish evident in his eyes. "I did, and I meant it. I haven't followed you until now. Something happened in the pack. I had no choice but to come." He spoke in a low tone, mindful not to attract onlookers. She stared at him, chest tight. "What do you mean? Is everything all right?" Her voice was guarded, yet concern seeped in despite herself. A grimace twisted his features. "No, it's not. We've been attacked by rogues. Or perhaps by another pack. Nobody is certain yet. They struck the outskirts of our territory while I was away, looking for closure. Our scouts were caught off guard. Houses were burned, supplies raided, and they left a warning, something about destroying the Alpha's line. I returned to help, but were overwhelmed. Aveline is holding the main territory, but many have been displaced." His voice grew hoarse, as though the memory still burned in his throat. "They're looking for me, for a weakness, and they've found it, my unclaimed mate. You." Aveline's heart pounded. Confusion churned in her mind. What does this have to do with me? I left. I have nothing to do with pack politics anymore. He shook his head, grim sorrow filling his expression. Wolves thirsting for power don't see it that way. If they discover the Alpha's mate is alive and unbound, they'll use you as leverage. They might kill you just to shatter me. I thought I could ignore that risk, let you live in peace, but the attacks confirm we're dealing with a ruthless force. Once they discover your existence, they'll hunt you down A surge of panic fluttered in her chest. She had chosen to reject Thorn, to leave the pack far behind. Now, forces beyond her control threatened to uproot her life again. She glared at him, fighting back tears of frustration. I didn't ask for any of this. I never wanted to be involved in pack conflicts. Why can't they just leave me alone? Thorn's shoulders sagged. I'm sorry, he murmured. I know how unfair this is, but it's the reality. I had to find you, to warn you. You have a right to know the danger you're in. He gestured toward the horizon, voice taut. They might already be searching. My scouts picked up a trail that suggests enemies moving west. When I realized they were heading in the same direction I sensed you might have gone, I rode straight here. I had no idea if you'd actually be in this town, but you are. He paused, taking a step closer. You have to leave, or come with me back to the pack to ensure your safety. Her throat constricted, anger sparking in her eyes. Go back with you? After all we've been through? After I made my choice? He grimaced. I'm only telling you the options. Stay here, and you could be hunted by killers who'll use you to weaken me. Return to the pack, and at least we can protect you, keep you beyond their reach. A tumult of emotions fled inside her, fear, resentment, a flicker of lingering affection. She recalled her fragile peace in Felwick, the small sense of normalcy she had begun to foster. Now it threatened to collapse. Was she doomed to be entangled in pack affairs no matter how far she ran? She gathered her courage, swallowing the knot in her throat. If I don't want to go back, can I run again? Flee to another land? Hide my identity? His expression darkened with concern. That might keep you safe for a time. But these rogues, or whoever is orchestrating the attacks, are determined. They'll keep looking if they think it will give them an edge. You'll spend your life looking over your shoulder, never staying in one place for long. Is that how you want to live? She trembled, torn by the same question that had haunted her from the start. She had already been living in a self-imposed exile, picking up menial work, hiding her nature, avoiding deeper bonds for fear of discovery. With this new threat, the fragile shelter she had found in Felwick could be shattered in an instant. People here could get hurt if the rogues arrived. Her gaze drifted to the inn's door, where Tara might step out at any moment, unsuspecting. Guilt knifed through her at the possibility of endangering these kind people. Thorn's voice interrupted her turbulent thoughts. If you don't trust me, or want to return to the pack, I'll do what I can to lead them away from you, he said, anguish leaking into his words. But it's a gamble. I can't guarantee your safety unless you're within our territory, guarded by loyal wolves. I'm sorry. She raised a trembling hand to her temple, pressing her fingers there as though to contain the emotional storm. The world felt impossibly unfair, forcing her again into a corner. She recalled every reason she had fled, her dreams of freedom, her rejection of the bond. Now, faced with the threat of violence, she realized her own longing for independence might come at the cost of innocent lives. If these rogues were truly as vicious as Thorn implied, they would not hesitate to torch Felwick if it meant drawing out the Alpha's mate. Her pulse thundered. Could she really force Thorn to leave, ignoring his warning, and risk letting the townsfolk pay the price for her stubborn idealism? She shut her eyes, letting the warm afternoon air wash over her. A memory rose in her mind, nights around the pack's bonfire, telling stories with other wolves, feeling the communal bond. Even though she had felt stifled then, she had never doubted the pack's willingness to protect its own. Now, she found herself torn between two grim realities. Remain alone with the threat of ruthless rogues looming, or return to a place she had wanted so desperately to escape. At length, she opened her eyes, focusing on Thorn's weary face. He looked braced for rejection, for more heartbreak. She breathed in and spoke in a faltering voice. I can't stay here knowing people might be harmed if these enemies come looking for me. And I can't run forever, watching villages burn in my wake. So I'll come with you, back to the pack, but only so we can deal with this threat. Afterward, once it's resolved, I'll leave again. Relief flickered in his eyes, mingled with sorrow. Thank you, he murmured, voice tight. We'll handle it. And if you still want to go after that, I won't stop you. She bit her lip, nodding slowly, her heart twisting in her chest. The bond fluttered with her decision, as though awakening from a long slumber. She tried to quell the surge of complicated emotion. Give me a moment to gather my things. I need to say goodbye, or at least give the innkeeper notice. He dipped his head. I'll wait. But we should leave before dusk. The longer we linger, the higher the risk. Aveline forced her legs to move, stepping away from him and slipping back into the inn. Tara spotted her, eyebrows knitting in concern at her ashen face. Aveline stammered an excuse about urgent matters that required her to leave town, apologizing profusely for the abrupt departure. Tara, though clearly disappointed, nodded understandingly, wishing her safe travels. Aveline explained that an old trouble had caught up with her, leaving out the details. She handed Tara the few coins she still had, insisting they be given to the innkeeper as a final payment for her room. With that, she retrieved her meager belongings from the small chamber upstairs, her heart heavy at the sudden end of a peaceful interlude. When she emerged from the inn, bundle in hand, Thorn was still there, watching her approach with a guarded expression. She took a trembling breath, half disbelieving that she was stepping back into his orbit voluntarily. I'm ready, she said, tightening her grip on her belongings. He nodded, gesture curt. We'll move quickly. I have horses tied a short distance away, hidden among the trees. Can you ride? She huffed a humorless laugh. Yes, I can ride. Without further conversation, they walked side by side away from Felwick Center, following a side path that led into the trees. Tension coiled between them, but now it was underscored by an urgent, unspoken mission. Aveline glanced over her shoulder one last time at the inn's wooden sign swaying in the breeze, feeling a pang of regret for the normal life she had almost been able to claim. Then she steeled herself, focusing on the path ahead. Sure enough, 2 horses were tethered under a large oak, nibbling at grass. One was a sturdy bay mare, the other a dark stallion with a restless air. Thorn approached them, patting the stallion's flank before untying the reins. She's yours, he said, indicating the mare. She's steady. Aveline approached the bay horse slowly, letting the animal catch her scent. She stroked its neck, murmuring a soft greeting before hoisting herself into the saddle. Thorn mounted the stallion, and they set off at a brisk pace, weaving through farmland until they reached a less-traveled road. The midday sun glinted on fields of grain, and the sweet smell of ripening crops lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the grim purpose that propelled them forward. The journey back toward the pack territory took several days, and during that time, Aveline hardly spoke. She kept her distance whenever they set up camp, preferring to gather firewood or care for the horses rather than engage in conversation. Thorn respected her space, though she occasionally caught him glancing her way with quiet longing that made her heart ache. They were tethered by necessity, not by choice. At least, that was how she rationalized it. She was determined not to let her emotions complicate an already fraught situation. They learned from passing travelers that trouble had indeed spread through multiple regions. Rumors of violent attacks by a marauding band of wolves circulated in hushed whispers, though no one was certain of the group's identity or motives. Some mentioned a crest, a black wolf silhouette on a crimson background left scrawled on ruined property. Aveline shivered at the mention. These attackers seemed to relish fear and chaos, a cruelty that violated the honor-bound codes most established packs upheld. On the fourth day, the landscape began to look more familiar. Towering pines and winding dirt roads signaled they were nearing the outskirts of Thorn's territory. The horses grew skittish, as though sensing the tension in their riders. Aveline's heart pounded as memories flooded back. Her old cabin, the orchard, the main hall. The sense of enclosure that had driven her away now returned in an unexpected surge of nostalgia. She almost forgot how beautiful the forest could be, dappled with golden sunlight. They pressed on until twilight, finally entering the central clearing of the pack settlement. The sight was both comforting and unsettling. A few wolves in human form hurried past, their expressions grim. The moment they spotted Thorn, though, they paused, relief lighting their faces. One young wolf jogged over, breathless. "Alpha! You're back. Evangeline's been organizing defenses. There's been another raid on the eastern border." Thorn swung down from his horse, expression tight. "Any casualties?" "A few injuries, but we drove them off for now. They retreated fast. Beta Evangeline is in the main hall, waiting for your return." Aveline dismounted quietly. Her presence drew stares from the wolves nearby. She felt the weight of their scrutiny. Some recognized her immediately, shock and confusion written across their faces. Word would spread quickly that the Alpha's rejected mate had returned under dire circumstances. Thorn tied the horses near a corral and turned to Aveline. "I need to meet with Evangeline. You should come, too. Hear the plan. The threat concerns you as much as it does us." She tensed at the idea of re-entering the main hall, recalling the painful confrontation where she first rejected Thorn. But she nodded, following him through the torchlit paths toward the imposing wooden structure. Pack members parted for them, some murmuring in hushed voices, others looking openly stunned. She forced herself to keep her chin high. She was not here as a submissive returning to the fold. She was here because she had no choice. Inside, the main hall was a hive of activity. Wolves in human form milled around large tables covered with maps, discussing defense strategies and supply lines. Aveline spotted Evangeline at the far end, leaning over a rough sketch of the territory with one of the elders. Upon noticing Thorn and Aveline, Evangeline straightened. The beta's steely demeanor softened just slightly with relief. "Alpha," she greeted, then dipped her head toward Aveline. "You've come back. Are you here of your own accord, or did Thorn drag you?" Aveline met her gaze firmly. "I returned because I learned about the threat. I don't want anyone hurt because of me." Evangeline nodded, respecting her honesty. "We're glad to have you. The situation is dire. These rogue wolves strike fast, then vanish. They leave behind a symbol, mocking our defenses, trying to rattle us. They haven't breached the heart of our territory yet, but they've destroyed supply outposts and scattered farmland. Our people are frightened." Thorn stepped forward, scanning the map. "Have you identified any pattern to their attacks?" Evangeline frowned. "We suspect they have spies. They appear where we're weakest. Every time we send a large force to protect one border, they strike another. They seem intent on disorienting us." We've also found tracks that suggest they move in smaller packs, converging only when needed. Organized chaos. Aveline listened closely, anxiety twisting her gut. Is there any clue who leads them? Evangeline shrugged. Not yet. Our scouts caught glimpses of a tall figure with a distinctive set of scars across his face. But no name. They say he fights like an alpha, or at least a wolf accustomed to leading. He's cunning, and rumor has it he wants to topple established packs one by one, claiming territory through fear. Thorne's jaw tightened. Then we need to fortify the borders, coordinate watchers. Evangeline. Gather the strongest trackers. We'll locate their base if possible. We need to put an end to this before they regroup for a final strike. They've been testing us so far, looking for vulnerabilities. Aveline hovered awkwardly, wishing she could vanish into the shadows. She knew little of war strategy, having spent her time in the pack focusing on her own plans for escape. Now, confronted with the grim reality of a full-scale threat, she felt a pang of regret for not understanding the intricacies of defending the territory she once called home. Evangeline turned toward her. You should be cautious too. If these rogues discover you're the Alpha's mate, they may target you specifically. Aveline swallowed. I'm aware. Where should I stay? My old cabin is near the orchard. Is that safe? Evangeline hesitated, glancing at Thorne. We can station guards, but it might be safer for you to remain closer to the main hall. If an attack comes, it will be easier to protect you. Aveline opened her mouth to protest, remembering how suffocated she had felt under watchful eyes. Then she realized the stakes. This was not about controlling her movements or forcing the role of Luna upon her. It was about keeping her alive in a war zone. She sighed. All right, I'll stay near the hall, but I won't be locked away. I can at least help with chores or wounded pack members. Evangeline nodded, respecting her willingness to contribute. Thorne looked on, his expression inscrutable, though she caught a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. She wondered if he was relieved that she wasn't fighting every measure of safety. Perhaps they both understood now that some battles were bigger than personal conflicts. In the days that followed, the pack rallied to build defenses. Wolves patrolled the borders in shifts, watchtowers were set up among the trees, and even the youngsters helped gather supplies. Aveline threw herself into assisting however she could, cleaning, mending garments, preparing simple remedies for those returning from skirmishes. It was strange to be part of the community again, to feel that old sense of camaraderie. Yet she remained on the periphery, neither Luna nor outcast. The pack members treated her politely, but uncertainty lingered in their eyes. Was she returning to claim her role as mate to the Alpha, or was she just a temporary ally? Thorne busied himself with strategy meetings and patrols. She rarely spoke to him directly, though they crossed paths in the main hall. Each time, a tangle of emotions rose in her chest, her wolf stirring at the sight of its fated mate, even as her rational mind reminded her why she had left. He seemed as conflicted as she was, caught between duty to the pack and the unspoken longing that still thrummed between them. One evening, after a series of raids had been intercepted, the pack convened in the hall to discuss next steps. The battered tables were scattered with maps, scraps of parchment, and charcoal sketches of likely rogue hideouts. Aveline stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as Thorne outlined a plan to strike back. His voice carried authority, confidence, the traits that made him a respected alpha. She couldn't deny she admired his leadership. She recalled seeing that same focus in him the day she realized they were mates, the depth of his commitment to the pack, to protecting what he believed in. It had once terrified her. Now, she recognized it as both a blessing and a burden. Aveline broke in with news from scouts. "We've located a cluster of them to the north, near the border with the next province. They've taken shelter in a series of caves. If we launch a decisive attack, we could disrupt their chain of command." Thorn agreed. "We'll move at dawn, split into 2 flanks, and corner them against the cliffs. If all goes well, we capture whoever's in charge. That might break their network of marauders." He glanced around, meeting eyes with his top warriors. "We need to be swift, but cautious. They fight dirty, and they have no honor." A murmur of determination ran through the assembled wolves. Aveline's heart hammered in her chest. This was the first time the pack was taking an offensive approach. If they succeeded, the threat might finally wane, and she could leave with a clearer conscience. She hoped the plan worked. The idea of prolonged violence filled her with dread. As dawn approached, Thorn led a group of seasoned warriors north. The settlement was left under Evangeline's supervision, with the remainder of the pack on alert for diversionary tactics. Aveline joined the ranks of those staying behind, pacing anxiously in the courtyard. Hours crawled by without news. Then midday arrived, and tension built to a near breaking point. She busied herself caring for a young wolf who had scraped his leg during patrol, but her thoughts kept drifting to Thorn and the warriors confronting the rogues in the caves. A swirl of unease twisted in her gut. By late afternoon, the first messengers returned, bloodied, breathing hard. They reported that the pack had clashed with a band of rogues near the caves. The fighting was fierce, but eventually the rogues scattered. Thorn and some of his top fighters pressed deeper into the caverns to pursue their leader. That was the last the messengers saw before they were sent back to request reinforcements. Evangeline mustered fresh troops, preparing to ride north at once. Aveline lingered in the courtyard, torn by indecision. She yearned to join, to ensure Thorn was safe, to do something besides stand idly by. The tension in her chest was unbearable. Finally, she gathered her courage and approached Evangeline, squaring her shoulders. "I want to come with you. I can't bear to wait here, not knowing if the others are all right." Evangeline studied her, lips pressed tight. "It could be dangerous, especially if the leader of these rogues is cornered, but an extra set of hands wouldn't hurt. Do you think you can handle what you might see on a battlefield?" Aveline swallowed hard, recalling how squeamish she had felt at the sight of blood in the past. But her resolve was stronger now. "I'll manage. I can at least help the wounded or bring supplies." Nodding, Evangeline signaled for her to mount one of the spare horses. They departed in a blur of hooves and determined faces, speeding along dirt roads into the northern forests. The smell of pine grew stronger as they neared the base of rocky hills. Evening shadows stretched across the land, painting everything in somber hues. Aveline's heart pounded, dread and urgency mingling in her veins. At last, the group reached the entrance to the caves, a gash in the hillside rimmed with jagged stone. Signs of recent conflict marred the ground. Broken weapons, scorched patches of earth, splatters of blood. Aveline dismounted, scanning the area for any sign of Thorn. Wolves in human form mingled in tense clusters, eyes flicking toward the dark mouth of the cavern. A handful of wounded lay on blankets, being tended by medics. She moved among them, offering what help she could, her stomach twisting at the sight of grievous injuries. One of the warriors recognized her. "Aveline!" he gasped, pressing a hand to a bleeding gash on his shoulder. The Alpha went inside, chasing their leader. That was hours ago. Some of us tried to follow, but the tunnels split. We lost track of them. She swallowed, a chill creeping over her. Is anyone still inside looking for him? The warrior shook his head weakly. "We're too scattered. Some wolves are trying to circle around. The caves run deep, and we fear an ambush." Aveline approached, overhearing. "We can't let Thorn face this alone. I'll take a small group inside. You," she pointed to a few of the less wounded, "come with me. The rest, stay here and hold the entrance. You're in no shape to crawl around those tunnels." Aveline stepped forward, meeting Evangeline's stern gaze. "I'm coming too. I can move quietly." The beta hesitated, then relented with a curt nod. "All right, but stay close. These caves can be treacherous." With that, Evangeline led the group into the cavern. Torches flickered in the stale air, revealing rough walls and a floor strewn with pebbles. The passage was narrow, forcing them to move in single file. Dark side corridors branched off in numerous places, any of which could harbor enemies. The smell of damp stone and old earth invaded Aveline's senses, setting her nerves on edge. They pressed deeper, occasionally hearing distant echoes, shouts, or the clang of weapons. It was impossible to pinpoint their origin. Sweat beaded on Aveline's forehead, and her heart hammered. She strained to catch any sign of Thorn's presence, a scent or a voice, but the winding tunnels distorted everything. After a grim half-hour of searching, they stumbled upon a small chamber littered with the remains of a camp, extinguished fire pits, rags, footprints in the dust. Evangeline crouched, examining them with a frown. They were here recently, but no sign of the Alpha. A flicker of movement caught Aveline's eye at the edge of the torchlight. She jerked, raising her hand to point. Before anyone could react, a figure lunged from the shadows, knocking one of the wolves to the ground. The attacker was tall, scarred across the cheek, snarling like an animal. A rogue. Chaos erupted. Evangeline darted forward with a knife. Another wolf brandished a sword. Aveline scrambled back, pressing against the wall, as the clash unfolded in a swirl of limbs and steel. The scarred rogue fought like a demon, swift and brutal. He disarmed one wolf, then slashed at another. Evangeline lunged, aiming a strike at his torso. He twisted aside, letting the blow graze him, and countered with a vicious backhand that sent her staggering. Aveline's heart thundered. She had no weapon, no training in advanced combat. But she couldn't stand by while the beta was overwhelmed. Summoning her courage, she scooped up a fallen blade from the ground. The rogue was focused on Evangeline, ignoring her. She crept along the wall until she found an opening, then slashed at his leg from behind. He roared in pain, turning on her with a snarl. Fear jolted through her, but she stood her ground, brandishing the knife. She caught a glimpse of burning hatred in his eyes, a savage glint that promised no mercy. Before he could strike, another figure crashed into him from the side. Thorn. Dirt smudged his face, and blood stained his shirt, but a fierce, determined light burned in his eyes. He grappled with the rogue, forcing the scarred man's arm aside. They staggered across the chamber, exchanging blows that echoed off the stone walls. Evangeline, regaining her balance, rushed in to assist. Between her strikes and Thorn's unrelenting assault, the rogue began to falter. Yet, in a last act of desperation, the scarred wolf wrenched free and aimed a savage cut at Thorn's exposed side. Horror flashed across Aveline's face. There was no time for him to dodge. Driven by instinct, she lunged forward, knocking Thorn sideways. The blade meant for his ribs grazed her arm instead, sending a hot jolt of pain coursing through her. She let out a cry as blood spattered on the cavern floor. But in that moment of distraction, Evangeline seized the rogue from behind, slamming the hilt of her weapon into his skull. The man crumpled, unconscious. Panting, Thorn rounded on Aveline, eyes wide with panic. "You're hurt," he gasped, gingerly touching her wounded arm. "Why did you—" She clutched the cut, wincing. "I couldn't watch him kill you," she managed through clenched teeth. Aveline, though breathing heavily, knelt and pressed a cloth to Aveline's arm. "We need to stop the bleeding." Thorn bent his head, pressing his forehead against Aveline's uninjured shoulder, relief mingling with guilt in his expression. "You saved my life," he whispered. "I'm sorry you were harmed." Aveline blinked back tears, a cocktail of pain and adrenaline making her lightheaded. "I'm fine. You're safe, that's what matters." For a moment they remained there, the tension between them tempered by the shock of surviving the ambush. Evangeline's voice cut through. "The rest of the caverns appear empty. Most rogues have fled or been caught. This one," she gestured at the unconscious figure, "seems to be their leader. We'll haul him out for questioning, find out who sent him." Thorn nodded. "Let's get out of these tunnels. Aveline needs better treatment for that wound." Carefully, they made their way back, supporting Aveline whenever her legs faltered from blood loss. The rush of open air at the cave's exit felt like a blessing. Medics hurried over, tending to her arm, wrapping it in bandages that burned with antiseptic herbs. She hissed in pain but held still, glancing around to see Thorn organizing the final details of securing the captive rogue. Cheers broke out among the pack at the sight of their alpha alive, at the near victory they had seized. Some wept with relief, while others gripped each other in tight embraces. As evening fell, the pack prepared to return home. A battered but triumphant group, they carried their wounded gently, including Aveline, who managed to walk with help. She felt Thorn's steady presence by her side, the warmth of his hand hovering near her elbow, ready to assist if she stumbled. She wanted to resent him for stirring old emotions, but gratitude wove its tendrils through her. She had chosen to come back after all, and in saving him, she had revealed a piece of her heart that refused to be fully severed. They arrived at the settlement under the moon's glow. Fires glinted in the courtyard, illuminating the relieved faces of those waiting. The captive rogue was escorted to a secure holding area for interrogation. Aveline directed the rest to the infirmary, or their dwellings to rest. Aveline found herself led to a small private chamber near the main hall, a place for the wounded to recover in relative quiet. One of the medics examined her arm thoroughly, applying fresh bandages and herbal poultices to reduce swelling. Thorn lingered nearby, his expression solemn. When the medic finished, he motioned for Thorn to speak to her privately, then left. Aveline shifted gingerly on the makeshift cot, wincing at the throb of her injury. She eyed Thorn warily. "You should rest," he said, voice subdued. "I can check on you in the morning." She nodded, gaze drifting to the bandages. "At least it's not too deep. Another inch, and it would have been worse." He swallowed, something haunted flickering in his eyes. "I've never been so terrified as when I saw that blade coming. You could have died." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze. "So could you," she replied softly. "I couldn't let that happen. The pack needs its alpha." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "And what about you?" he asked gently. "Do you still need your freedom so badly that you'd leave as soon as this threat is over?" Her heart fluttered at the tenderness in his voice. She recalled all her reasons for rejecting him, her dreams, her fear of a life constrained. Yet the events of the past weeks had shown her a different kind of strength in him, a willingness to bend for her sake. She could not deny the bond still lived, battered but alive, yearning for completion. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know," she admitted, voice trembling. "Everything is so different from what I imagined. I never wanted to cause you pain or for you to risk your life chasing me." He knelt by the cot, reaching out tentatively. When she didn't pull away, he gently took her uninjured hand in his. "I won't force you to stay," he said, sincerity anchoring each word. "I promised I would let you go if that's your final wish. But you saved me. And not just from a blade. You saved me from my own darkness. My obsession was consuming me. But seeing you stand with us, choosing to protect the pack despite your fears, it made me realize that we could fight for our future together, if only we can learn to trust each other." A sob caught in her throat. She remembered all the nights she yearned for a grand adventure, unburdened by the pack's demands. But she also felt the keen sting of nearly losing him, of witnessing the pack's genuine camaraderie in the face of danger. The world was not as simple as she had once believed. Escaping the territory had not guaranteed contentment, and returning had not doomed her to imprisonment. Perhaps there was a space in between, a compromise that neither had envisioned before. She squeezed his hand, emotion strangling her voice. "I'm scared," she confessed. "I've always been scared that staying would mean losing myself." Thorne's eyes softened. "I understand. But what if we tried a new way? We can let the pack structure adapt. Wolves have traveled with their mates before, left betas to lead for periods of time. We can explore that option, see more of the world, and still return when we're needed. The old traditions aren't unbreakable if the Alpha insists on change." Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a newborn flame. "You'd really do that? Leave the territory sometimes, just so I can follow my dreams?" He nodded, swallowing thickly. "I want to see the seas you've talked about, the mountains beyond our borders. Anything that helps you feel free. You're not just the Alpha's mate. You're an individual with dreams. If you allow it, I'll stand beside you while you pursue them. We'll find our balance." Tears welled in her eyes, and she clasped his hand as though it were a lifeline. The final threads of her resistance frayed under the weight of his earnest confession. A swirl of emotions, relief, love, lingering uncertainty, flooded her. But she sensed a new path opening, one shaped by cooperation rather than coercion. She thought back to the times she had seen him listening to the pack's concerns, adapting to crises. She realized that for all his alpha dominance, Thorne was capable of evolving, if given the chance. At last she whispered, "I want that too. I want to try." He exhaled, as though releasing a breath he had held for ages. Gently, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek, his touch sending a warmth through her that eclipsed the pain in her arm. "Then rest," he said, voice thick with emotion. "We'll talk more in the morning. We still have to secure our borders, end the threat completely, but after that, we can start forging a life together, one that honors both of us." She closed her eyes, leaning back against the cot's pillow. The swirling turmoil in her heart had not vanished, but it felt more manageable, tempered by the possibility of a shared future. With Thorne's hand gently holding hers, she drifted into sleep, carrying the hope that maybe, just maybe, love and freedom did not have to be at war. In the weeks that followed, the pack interrogated the captured rogue leader and learned that he was part of a larger conspiracy to destabilize multiple territories, hoping to seize land in the chaos. His band was scattered thanks to the pack's counterattacks, and the threat subsided as quickly as it had begun. Thorn and Aveline remained vigilant, forging new alliances with neighboring packs to prevent future incursions. During that time, Aveline's wound healed, and her days were filled with a mixture of healing, introspection, and tentative steps toward a new understanding with Thorn. She watched him negotiate with the elders, easing some traditional strictures to allow for more flexible leadership. He began designating specific roles to trustworthy wolves, so that he would not be the sole linchpin holding the territory together. Though some elders grumbled, most recognized the wisdom of distributing responsibility. Little by little, Aveline felt her fears subside. She caught glimpses of the future she had once pictured. Journeys to distant lands, explorations of cultures beyond the pack's forest. Thorn's unwavering support gave her confidence that such a dream might be realized without losing the connection that had grown between them. The bond felt different now, not a chain, but a partnership, formed by trials faced together. The day finally arrived when the pack gathered for a subdued ceremony, not the grand spectacle she had once dreaded. Thorn stood before the assembled wolves, Aveline at his side, as he acknowledged her acceptance of the mate bond. There was no force, no archaic demand, only a quiet, heartfelt vow to protect and respect each other. Aveline blessed the union with a solemn nod, the pack howling in a gentle chorus that resonated through the clearing. As night fell, Aveline gazed up at the star-filled sky, standing hand in hand with Thorn near the orchard she used to frequent. Memories of her anxious flight felt distant, almost dreamlike. She inhaled the scent of ripe fruit and pine, letting the hush of the forest envelop them. Turning to him, she whispered, "Thank you for giving me the space to choose, and for being willing to change." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, a smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you for trusting me enough to return." They embraced, the bond humming with a gentle warmth that spoke of shared hopes rather than shackles. She closed her eyes, resting her forehead against his, comforted by the steady beat of his heart. This was a beginning, not an ending. The pack would see them depart sometimes, would welcome them home. The path ahead was not a singular road, but many trails branching in all directions, waiting to be explored together. At last her restless spirit found solace in the idea that freedom was not simply the absence of ties, but the ability to choose them on her own terms. She had chosen Thorn, and he had chosen her. And though the future was vast and uncertain, they stood at its threshold, united in purpose. The orchard breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and she smiled at the moon's gentle glow, finally feeling at peace with the life she had claimed, hand in hand with the alpha she had once rejected, and now embraced without regret.